Okay,
You are now live.
okay, we are now live.
Michael, we just got it, please. Yep.
That's whoever is unlucky enough to be next to the. Tuesday. All right. Okay, so Michael, you're back with us for 7:09.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So I think you know why the bill is here, because the Senate Agriculture Committee added a section that would have exempted the Franklin County State Airport from the prime ag soil mitigation requirements of Act 250.
Yes.
Do you want me to walk through the rest of the bill?
No.
Okay. So the Senate Ag Committee did add section 12 to H709. It would not withstand the retroactive prohibition in 1 VSA 214 or any provision to the contrary in Act 250, and provide that the conversion of primary ag soils by development or subdivision at the Franklin County State Airport shall not be required to conduct mitigation or pay a mitigation fee for the conversion of primary ag soils under Act 250. If the development or subdivision is the result of improvements or maintenance authorized under Title V, the Transportation Chapter, or if the development or subdivision was authorized under the Federal Aviation Administration's master plan for the airport, and Franklin County State Airport obtains any permit or permanent amendment that may be required under Act 250 for the development or subdivision. So it does not exempt the development or subdivision at the airport from the Act 250 permit, but from prime ag soil mitigation or mitigation fees. Because you can do on-site mitigation and you can do off-site mitigation, and off-site mitigation is a fee paid depending on the ratio.
Michael, mask.
Oh, sorry.
Depending on the ratio where your property is located, and according to a table of fees that the Secretary of Ag issues each year. Franklin County, I believe, is District 6, and so it's about $3,013 a year per acre.
Every year?
No, it's it's $3,013 for this year, 2022, per acre.
Okay,
So it's not
just
every-
do one time mitigation.
Those fees change each year.
Okay.
I just missed them.
Have we done this for anybody else? That you know of?
You have changed the ratios for other types of development, going from 1 to 1 in downtown designated areas. Definitely varies. I don't recall you waiving ag mitigation entirely for
Where is the Franklin County Airport?
Swanton/Highgate.
One Highgate, okay.
And it's about 100 acres, right?
Right, that's because that's a good question. It depends on where and what they're disturbing for part of their permit, and whether or not, I don't know, I've heard various estimates of the amount of acreage involved. I heard one that it's only going to be 3 to 4. So then you're talking about $22,000, and then that neighborhood at a 3 to 1 ratio. And I've heard 100 acres, like pretty much everything, and that's closer to $400,000. So I don't really.
And who pays this? The state,
No, the permit applicant pays the fee.
which would be the developer.
Yes, and
But the state owns the airport?
it is a state airport, yes.
Okay. Dr. Hardy.
Couple questions. Who, is there a planned development at this airport that they're trying to exempt them from this fee? Or,
They are trying to be attractive to certain developers to come to that airport, kind of the way that Beta went to South Burlington.
So-
Maybe even attracting Beta's secondary site.
so that was the sort of thought behind this exemption.
I think it's the thought behind the development, and then when they get into the issue of development, they're looking at the costs, and this, depending on the scope of the development, is a significant cost.
Senator from Franklin is here. Okay. Senator Gray did not join us. So this is a private developer it's state-owned airport. Who's is this coming from like the local regional development authority?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
All right, and they're trying to develop.
They're trying to make the airport an attractive place to develop.
They're already expanding the runway, right?
Right. They already have FAA money to expand the runway and expand capacity.
We just expanded I put in a whole second runway, so you weren't taking off and landing on the same one. At NAP, that's very developable up in that area. Blue Cross Blue Shield is up there by the airport. I don't ever remember being asked to waive any in that.
You may not have been on prime ag soil. Remember, it's a soil-based
Yeah,
requirement.
well, there's a lot of farms up around there. Okay. Senator Hardy, did you have other questions? I know you.
Yeah, I don't, I just have a problem with this just in general. I think that exempting a specific airport from a fee just is not, for a specific project, without looking at it holistically, is a mistake. And I also just have a real problem with airports trying to be treated differently than everyone else these days, and that has come up a number of times. There's an airport in my community, and it is basically wreaking havoc on our tiny little town. And I'm firmly against this, and will vote no on this. And I think we should take this out. It's amazing to me that the Ag Committee did this, because this is something that is not in keeping with protecting farmland and farm soils and all the work that they've been trying to do to protect soils. This seems completely contrary to that, and I'm disappointed in the committee.
Is your airport state-owned?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I never count, there's several around here. Senator Brock. I was saying, all I was thinking was Senator Franklin, and I knew that wasn't right. It's been a long morning, Randy.
My committee has already discussed the status of the airport and restrictions regarding agricultural soil at the airport.
Well, I talked about Act 250 and the requirement for the mitigation of primary ag soils under Act 250. And you can do on-site mitigation, but for a development which is going to involve construction, subdivision, etc., of on-site mitigation, which is basically conserving the primary ag land for an agricultural use, doesn't really make sense if you're going to be, if your intention is to.
You don't want your cows at the end of the runway.
So the other option is offsite mitigation, which is payment of the fee according to the ratio of that's relevant to that parcel of land. And it's likely going to be 3-to-1 from what I know of the area.
So you've got to conserve 3 acres for every acre.
Or pay the fee
Pay the fee.
for 3-acre fee for each acre that's going to be disturbed. So one of the things I don't really know, and I've heard different numbers for, is the amount of acreage that would be impacted. I've heard everything from like just a few to up to 100. So,
Anything that large at all.
right, some people are saying it's it would be for the entire, all of the primary.
Airport property.
Right, which is, I never really thought that was the case. I thought it's gonna be, I think it's between 3 to 4 acres of prime ag soil that would be disturbed.
That may be, I don't know the exact number, it's easy enough to find out, but one of the issues is there are restrictions, FAA restrictions, in terms of being able to use that land, even if it was prime ag soil. You can't use it for ag, you can't use it for agriculture. The FAA had preempted that, and the preemption, in fact, my understanding is, came into place before even Act 250 was passed. It's a long-standing issue that you can't grow corn on an airport, for example.
Right, it's all of the aviation safety requirements, the distancing, your animal control, the
Yeah, you
fencing.
don't want to herd a deer or turkeys standing on the runway.
Exactly. I remember landing in Middlebury many years ago, Ruth, where you were, and had to abort the landing because there was a horse on the runway. And of course, we try to
Actually,
prevent
it was
that.
on the
sort of
news
stuff.
the other night, there was a pelican on the runway somewhere, and they had to get a car out to encourage the pelican to move.
You don't want to hit a pelican.
No, you don't. We've lost more than one plane by bird sucking. Senator Pearson.
So I was not in committee when this passed, but I was supportive of this, kind of. So I thought I'd just explain that, especially since my whole committee was, shall we say, sharply condemned by my neighbor.
Yes.
There are, you can't use this ag soil. That is pretty compelling to then charge somebody to not use it. That just sort of.
Can't use what can't be used anyway.
That just sort of is strange. It's also publicly owned airport, and so charging ourselves to pay for, that's interesting anyway. That's, I think, a small factor. But the initial request and the bill that was filed was to exempt all airports of this. We were not interested in that. And the context is, big airports, open areas in Plattsburgh with millions of dollars ready to lure companies. And, we're never going to win those games. In Beta, we have an employer, an interesting project that to
So
me
there is a project.
well, I mean, they're part of it. As I understand, they're not the only factor at all, though they are loudly being courted by New York. Look, so I'm not a big corporate welfare guy, but I sure would like to have Vermont play a role in cracking electric aviation. I mean, for shipping and stuff.
Oh, that.
That's
the
not a
electric-
small.
the electric-
Yeah, that's what Beta is, and
Yeah, they're in Burlington now.
they're South Burlington now. There's talk of them taking over the Eveready plant in St. Albans to do not only battery work for their own needs, but any airplane battery will have a very narrow window of the lifespan because you wouldn't want to have a risky airplane battery. So then you have the potential for repurposed batteries to help in cars where you run out of battery, or your battery goes kapooey and you're on the side of the road, not crash landing. So I mean, to me, there are multiple factors here that make this more than just some big corporation that wants to take advantage of the taxpayers. I think. And on balance, this was a compromise. So
Okay, there are other goals involved here, state goals.
They're taking
I think so.
agricultural land out of production.
No,
no,
no.
because it's owned by the airport. They're developing. The goal is to develop some of the land on the periphery of the airport, back where the field days have been. Bless you.
Correct, it's a field day site.
And as you develop that former ag land, you would pay the mitigation, but the FAA has already said you can't plant on this land, so that's where it gets like,
And it's not just Beta, I mean, there are also good indications that you're going to have, probably not confirmed, but UPS, FedEx also site there. So
They
this
like
is
the
something that Franklin County is looking at something like 1,200 jobs from this overall.
Okay.
The thing is that this is a company that's, and I don't disagree that it's, potentially useful, whatever, socially beneficial, et cetera, but it is asking for exemptions from a bunch of land use rules around the state. And this is one of them, the whole parking thing that we put in. House is probably, hopefully taking out the transportation bill. That was also for Beta. So they're really, they're asking for exemptions from land use laws and fees around the state. And they're driving development of what were small airports into larger airports, including airports that are in residential areas. And I think there needs to be a broader conversation about how do you better, have economic development in a way that is not impinging on the land use and residential areas of our state. And this one exception may very well be, like, for all the reasons you argue, Senator Brock and Senator Pearson, an okay sort of carve out, but it is a slippery slope. And I'm not, it's a slippery slope and I'm not willing to go down that slope. So whatever we vote, I'll vote no, but I hear that I'm in the minority, so that's fine.
I wouldn't count your chickens yet. I want to hear from Mr. Weiss. We can have committee. Fortunately, at this time of the year, we don't have the luxury of, this bill probably should come out of here today. We are going, I'm currently into having a little trouble getting staffing, but we'll keep going. So, Mr. Weiss, welcome.
Good afternoon, and thank you for holding the hearing on section 12 of this bill, page 709. I'm Thomas Weiss, a resident of Montpelier, and my testimony is basically on the magnitude of the proposal of section 12 on the airport. And I sent you each an email this morning that has a copy of my testimony in it. I don't know if it's been posted on your site yet or
Did you
not.
send it to,
I sent it to each of you.
okay, but did you send it to Faith?
I did send it to Faith
Okay.
also.
And it probably has been posted.
I haven't checked.
No, I do not see it yet, but it will get up there.
But you did send an email to.
I did send an email to each of you, and
Okay,
part of the email is a map of the airport and its surroundings, which I'll use in my testimony. And right now, during my, I think you should remove section 12 from the bill. I'll hit the end first. I'll cover the end first. The airport has an area of 350 acres, and that's Agency of Natural Resources has their Natural Resources Atlas, and it shows all the parcels and it gives the acreages of all the parcels. And on that map, the airport is the parcel indicated using the light blue shading, which I don't have a black and white copy, so I can't hold it up to you, but it's this area here. And looking at it, there are, and the exhibit also shows the primary agricultural soils. So you can, and almost the entire airport has primary agricultural soils on it. It turns out they are of the lower quality, so not wanting to contradict Mr. O'Grady, but it's a 2-to-1 ratio for most of the airport, as I understand all of the Agency of Agricultural Markets and the Yankee 50 rules. But half 110 of these acres could be developed, almost, and there are about 110 unbuilt acres on the airport site that could still be developed. And so various numbers of 3 acres or 50 acres or 100 acres depends on how far out one is going. I've heard testimony in other committees that an immediate project is 3 or 4 acres. Then there are 3 more projects waiting in the wings of 30 or 40 acres. And there are even more undisclosed beyond that that are sending out feelers for locating there. So the whole 110 acres could eventually be developed. And at a 2-to-1 ratio, that would be well over 200 acres that would need to be mitigated elsewhere. And I won't go there yet. And then the airport has a plan for a proposal in 2009, which I believe is still current at the Agency of Transportation site, which indicates adding an additional 140-acre parcel next to the airport to the airport. So section 12, and that one could have perhaps 110 acres developed that would not interfere with all the flight clearances that are required by the FAA. So that's over 200 acres. That would be 400 acres of mitigation. But at a 2-to-1 ratio, at $3,000 an acre, those 200 acres would be almost $600,000 that would go into the Vermont Housing and Conservation Trust Fund for conserving farmland. And it's not a matter of the state paying itself. What happens is the developer pays to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board into the fund, and then that money goes to the farmers whose land is being conserved. And without that additional money coming into the fund, those acres would be conserved. And so that was that part of it. And please remember that the state owns 10 airports. And the sponsors of the bill originally in both the House and the Senate tried to get it to be for all 10 airports. And the respective committees in those 2 chambers, the Natural Resources and Energy and Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife, took it out. They did not accept that. And so I would fully expect if section 12 remains in the bill that the sponsors, and I believe Senator Brock was one of the sponsors in the Senate side, I have a feeling they'll come back to ask for all 10 airports. And, so we're talking about potentially thousands of acres of farmland having money go into the Housing and Conservation Trust Fund to preserve thousands of acres of airport that would not be conserved if this section 12 remains in effect, and then it gets expanded in the future.
Well, it won't get expanded unless this committee or a similar committee allows it to.
I understand that.
And if you don't do this, and it adds $600,000 to the project, and New York State's got all kinds of money, and Plattsburgh is killing itself to compete with Burlington, we could find ourselves having lost a premier employer and not getting paid because no land will get developed here. And so I think that's what we're weighing at this point. I am going to have a degree in dentistry when I finish here. Senator Bray.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I thought Senator
You're
Bray might
brave.
have a
You're
question,
muted.
but he is muted.
Oh,
Having a little trouble running the buttons here.
Did you have a question for Mr. Weiss?
No, but I appreciated his testimony because when this came up in Senate Natural Resources and Energy, we discussed not just Franklin County, but other airports and the fact that the language doesn't apply to the airport is currently existing, but also would allow for expansion of the airport. So I understand how from an economic development point of view, someone might want to consider this, but from a revenue impact on the revenues of the state part, unless you're going to consider potential economic development one day, a revenue of the state issue. I'm hoping that we'll keep, we're looking right into Act 250 here, 10 VSA 151, and it's a fundamental provision that we help not develop soil by, or when it's taken, prime ag soils are taken, that we at least try to build the fund that helps conserve in other places. So we had a unanimous committee vote opposing this language when it came through our
So
committee.
this went to your committee, so how did it end up here?
No, the bill did.
There was another bill?
Yeah, it's been, I think this is, this provision is looked for a home in more than one place. I'm just saying.
Okay, what about the testimony that the FAA won't allow that to be used as ag soil? You can't plant crops that attract herds of animals to the end of a runway.
Well, it's an interesting piece of the, I don't know the ins and outs of how close you can get with cropping or not, but there's still a big difference between putting in buildings, creating impermeable soils, parking lots, structures. There's stormwater impact. There's a lot of impacts besides that you're not taking a crop off of the land. And
I thought it was the use, not the crop. It was, you were removing it from being able to be used as agricultural soil. But the testimony was this can't be used for agriculture anyway. Do you know how many of the state's airports? I don't remember being asked to waive anything when we put a runway in up at Knapp, and that is a highly developed area. Lots of corporate light jets seem to show up there. Do you know how many of the airports are on prime ag soil?
I don't. We didn't take testimony. What really drove the conversation primarily was it was at that point in time a proposal from Senators Brock and Parent. That was what triggered the conversation, and our most detailed discussion was around that. But we also realized that we were opening the door to doing the same thing at all the state airports.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I have
If it wasn't
Yeah.
prime ag soils, we wouldn't be having a conversation. Is that right?
Right, but there is soil, and there is soil that can be used for agriculture, no matter what kind of soil that is. The FAA says you can't plant anything on it.
It's true, Madam Chair. If you lengthen the runway by 100 feet,
Yeah,
you've just taken another 100 feet of soil of what was ag land that is now too damn close to the airport to grow crops on.
I
So
don't think you're going to be growing crops at the end of a runway.
it's the equivalent of saying you take the last car off the train because that's the one that has all the accidents, and then you don't have any more accidents.
Right, okay.
It
Well-
doesn't go away.
Senator Pierce.
So, Michael, the language for council, the language refers to the master plan,
To the what?
to the master plan for the Franklin County State Airport.
Yeah.
So is that a fixed document? I'm hearing some discomfort, and again, I wasn't in ag when we actually approved this language, so I'm trying to, I'd be more open to this if I understood that it wasn't potentially an ever-growing universe. And so the reference to the master plan, I assume that's Is that a fixed document or is that evolve itself?
It's one of those plans that has a time period. I have to go and see.
Okay, maybe Senator Brock could do it to help us find that. I'm gonna have to bring this conversation to an end.
Let me just add one thing.
If we can't resolve it, then the bill is gonna die. But I am now a half hour overtime, and we have the bottle bill.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
The purpose for mitigating agricultural soils is because they are being taken up with
Yes.
development. This is not about airports.
Okay.
And we have a policy in this state that when you take agricultural land, because for whatever reason, whether it's FAA or whatever, you invest in the preservation of agricultural lands.
Right.
And I am not going to read aloud 110 different development,
okay, Senator,
which is each of these 110 that I'm not going to read, all wish to develop on agricultural soils. And we have a plan for doing that. And why do we exempt some and not others?
Well, keep in mind this, we couldn't develop on this land before we had Act 250 because you had FAA rules. So that's
No one
where-
is saying that they
Okay,
can't
okay,
develop on it.
no.
They're saying, do you pay the mitigation fee
all right,
like everything
Senators,
else?
this is off. We're going on to the next agenda item. We are not going to resolve this in 5 minutes. We will get a copy of the master plan. And we will see if we can find, if A&R can help us find out how
Okay.
many of the airports are located on prime ag land.
So,
All right?
okay, Madam Chair,
Okay.
it's not about airports.
Senator, I think you've made your position clear. I'm trying to get information for the rest of the committee.
Welcome.
Okay.
So the FAA
Mr.
map-
Brady, and I think you're up on the table next.
Okay, the FAA master plans are every 10 years. You probably want the Agency of Agriculture and the Agency of Transportation because they're the two that
Okay,
have the most information about A, the prime ag soils, and B, the site conditions of each state airport. A&R is probably not very involved.
Is this the only source of fund for our conservation dollars?
No.
Right, we're giving them more money. Yeah, okay.
okay, yeah. Okay, so we are going on to the bottle bill. And I thought, I was told this was a simple little bill, everybody agreed, everybody liked it, and we could just whisk it right out of here. And about 5 o'clock Friday, whenever I got to go to my emails, I've got an email from the solid waste district saying they didn't support the final version, something to do with wine bottles. So I really don't like passing out a recycling bill when the prime recycling organization in the state opposes it. And I have got about 100 people who want to talk. I'm trying right now to find out what's the problem and is there an easy solution? Because we don't have time to do 100 things. We got another bill today. And I'm having trouble getting staffing into the evening, so we've got to keep working. Senator Bray.
Thank you. So I'm not sure, I hope I certainly didn't represent the bill to you as an easy in, easy out. It's,
No, I think that was higher up than our pay grade.
okay, good, because, you know, as chair of the committee that wrote this, I just say, we looked at the House version of the bottle bill, which basically said, take the current system, triple the volume through it with very little in the way of adjustments, and that's what would happen. And, you would sweep in many more types of containers. We looked at that. We spent time. We went out to visit redemption centers. We focused on the logistics of the current system, felt as though it was on the verge of breaking and on the verge of breaking. There's parts of it that do not work well already. And trying to put 3 times the volume through it was not, in our opinion, wise. So we looked at, if you start from scratch, what would you create? And that's what the bill in front of you is. It says, instead of always dealing with problems after they're created, as in now we have a pile of waste and now we have to somehow deal with it responsibly, could we go upstream to the individuals, the persons, the manufacturers creating the products that are becoming the problematic waste, and have them have an obligation to participate managing a system that addresses those costs and then maximizes the responsible use of those later in life. So that's why it's a producer responsibility organization, also known as extended producer responsibility. It's like we do with paint, with batteries, et cetera. And so we said, we're not going to tinker on the downhill side. We're going to look at a structure that tries to address the issue at the source.
Okay.
And that's the background for what it
All
is.
right, the word I've heard is wine bottles. So I'm gonna have Michael O'Grady walk us through very briefly, just tell us what this bill does. Then I don't know if I'm gonna go to John Letty from the Northwest Vermont Solid Waste Management and hear what their concern is, and then we'll see if we can't find a solution to get this bill out of here. I am told we are going home next Tuesday.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
we got a bill from the House that basically wanted to copy what we did in May. In the committee next door, we said, we had a couple questions, and I'm only posing these because I think it will help. What would we here in Vermont like to copy of what they did in May? 2, what would we do differently? Those were 2 questions we asked. Then there was 3, what should we tackle now? And 4, what should we tackle later? And I believe we will find that wine bottles are a subset of a subset that we decided tackling later was more wise. This is, and we have all been around here long enough to know that after a group of people puts a bill together and there are a bunch of compromises made, that some of those people that compromise then go to the next committee and try and get what they had failed to get in the original bill, in the original committee of jurisdiction that spent days and days and days. That's where we are now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I am trying to avoid relitigating the bottle bill. I just want to know it sounds like there's one problem, and if there is a simple solution to that problem. That's all I'm trying to find out at this point in time. I don't want to mix the whole thing.
Do you want me to just focus on the wine bottle issue?
I could use the benefit of a very brief.
Yeah, I would say I found the floor presentation somewhat confusing. I am not sure what this manufacturer's take back association is, how that's different, and what the impact is on our solid waste. What I don't want is, as we were told last time, depending on how we play with the waste stream, it will impact the ability of the solid waste districts to deal with, and that was plastic bottles, to deal with financing cardboard or whatever the thing you can't get rid of this year is. And I'm not sure what we've done.
So, 100,000 foot level, what this bill does is it expands the scope of the bottle bill by amending the definition of beverage to be broader than the current definition. As proposed by Senate Natural, it would be for all drinks in liquid form intended for human consumption, except for milk, dairy products, plant-based beverages, infant formula, meal replacement drinks, non-alcoholic cider, or wine in glass containers. In contrast, the House included wine and did not make the distinction between glass or other types of containers. So that's an important difference between the House and Senate version. Senate version just includes wine, but not if it's in a glass container.
Okay, so it excluded wine in glass containers, which says you can recycle box wine. I don't know, what do you do with a cardboard box?
Well, actually, the bill that's proposed by Senate Natural would not include cartons or paper, but
That's what-
there's wine in cans,
Yeah,
there's wine in plastic. Hard cider is technically a wine, so citizen cider, other hard ciders in cans would be subject to it.
but most wine comes in a liter bottle or.
Right, and so then you have the competing interest with regards to wine bottles. There are those retailers and some of the redemption centers who believe that they are a different type of container to deal with because they're heavier, they take up more space, there may be more sorts because you're dealing with multiple distributors and manufacturers. So it's to them, a problematic issue. On the other side, you have the solid waste management entities who have had issues with managing glass, especially glass from the single stream recycling, and what to do with it, because it's not a readily, if it's not clean, it's not something that has a lot of ready uses. And there have been issues with some of the solid waste management entities and their management of glass because they don't have readily available markets for it.
Well, but
So there you
I'm
have.
already recycling my wine bottles.
So a solid waste management entity may want the glass in the system because it removes that large source of glass from their responsibility and puts it into the product. But then the retailer and the redemption center says, well, that then shifts to us the responsibility to manage those large and potentially unwieldy containers. So that is what Senate Natural addressed. They heard there's a study in the bill with a required recommendation on how to deal with glass wine bottles going forward.
But this bill would not add to the burden of recycled wine bottles unless people start drinking a whole lot more wine.
Well,
They're handling it now. You throw your wine bottle in the recycling bin.
right, but that goes either to your solid waste management entity or who will separate it at the facility,
Right.
or it goes into a single source, single stream recycling operated by Casella and similar
Yeah.
solid waste haulers. And so, but again, that potentially creates problems with the management of glass for a solid waste management entity, because you will hear from those who support bringing wine in or bringing any glass container into the bottle bill that it produces a cleaner product that can then be reused in subsequent manufacturing or product production. So you have two competing interests.
Yeah. But I can't, are you looking for Senator Hardy?
I am.
She's in education.
She's in education.
She's very
Presenting
popular
later, I
today.
She's in demand.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry for
Good
being
luck.
kept.
No, what I'm saying is this bill, I understand why there's competing interests. But right now, wine bottles are going out in my recycle bin for Casella or if I'm hauling them to the solid waste district. By not, and I understand why they would like to be relieved of that burden, but this bill in and of itself doesn't increase that burden, it just doesn't take it away.
But it does take away a lot of other things. that
It
they
does
like.
take away other things that
So
they
it's-
like.
I think it's fair to say.
Right, but part, yes, you would move aluminum that is not currently covered would become covered. And so hard cider, some iced teas, some sports drinks,
Or can't.
wine and cans, those would all be aluminum that would go into the system and would not necessarily be going to a solid waste management entity, so they would not be getting that aluminum back. But part of what this bill does is require the manufacturers and distributors to form a product responsibility organization that implements an approved plan. And under that plan, they are required to compensate redemption and collection centers. So there would be some cost shifted from the manufacturers and distributors. Well, the cost that the solid waste management entities have right now would be shifted to the manufacturers and distributors through the payment underneath the plan. So there is, that is probably attractive to the solid waste management entities to help them shift cost of management that is typically either funded through the solid waste management account or fees and taxes on its members. So that's another part of this plan. And it's not, I think you're probably going to hear more than just a glass wine bottle issue. I think you'll probably hear some other issues on both sides, right? On both sides.
We will.
Support and
Okay. Senator Bray.
Yeah. Could you ask Michael to speak to the timelines of these different elements rolling out? Because I think some of the pressure that this committee's feeling, that our committee initially felt, was because as though we were doing this tomorrow. There's actually a 3+ year development period. So maybe Michael could talk about the different steps and how they relate to the dates in the bill.
Sure. Well, the first step is in 2024, the manufacturers and distributors have to basically register their products, have a UPC label on their containers, and then participate in a product responsibility organization. That's all in 2024. And then in 2025, January 1, 2025, the scope of the bottle bill would expand based on that expanded definition of beverage that I read to you. And so that is when that product responsibility organization will be implementing the stewardship plan. There would still be a deposit. There would still be redemption centers. Where they are and what locations is mandated by the stewardship plan, so it's hard to say now where they exactly would be. And then for purposes of finance, that is when 50% of the sheets would be retained by the producer responsibility organization to help them initiate implementation of the stewardship plan. And those sheets would be kept by the producers for 5 years until 2030, which then all the sheets would be going to the state, except that instead of all of them going to the Clean Water Fund, 50% would go into the Clean Water Fund, 50% would go into the Solid Waste Management Assistance Account, which is used to provide funding to solid waste management entities and the agency for activities like recycling.
Okay. I remember sweating blood in this committee trying to find money for clean water. And we're now taking, well, 50% of these sheets out of that. Has anyone? That sounds
Well,
more like
it's
our
such a bigger-
jurisdiction.
Don't forget, it's a huge, much bigger universe, right? I don't know. if
There be, right, Dan Dickerson has done a fiscal note. I don't know if you have seen it. I don't know. if you-
Actually, I think he told me he might not have it done until today.
Okay. It may not, I've seen a draft of it. I don't know if it's finalized. It looks pretty good. Dan did a good job. But there is estimated increase in the amount of the sheets because of the expansion of.
Okay,
But then you have to then realize that there's expansion in the sheets, but then that revenue gets retained 50% by the producer. So your expansion is kind of offset by that producer keeping half. And it's not totally a one-to-one.
and somebody will be responsible, the manufacturers, for having a place in the city of Montpelier that you can take your bottles to.
So there is a convenience standard that's required underneath the stewardship plan. And one of the convenience standards is that there needs to be at least one location in a city or town with 7,000 or more citizens, residents, to provide immediate redemption and return of the deposit in that
And that
size.
with the grocery store count.
It potentially could count, yes.
Because that's one of the concerns that I've had emails on, is that right now, you have to drive to the beverage barn, which is counter to some of our other environmental goals. And that at this present moment, on Saturday morning, which is when most people are free, the waiting time can be a half an hour. And people are not gonna wait an hour to return some bottles. And so I think making that convenience factor, and I know there's been issues in the kingdom because of the distance and the lack of convenience. Senator Bray.
Yeah, thank you. So you've mentioned more than once your lament that Montpelier lost its redemption center. The threshold in this bill ensures that Montpelier
The city took it.
and cities of its size will have redemption centers because we're very conscious of how the current system is. It has gaps where there are people who may have 20-minute drives to get to a redemption center. So it aims to have more redemption centers with real capacity closer together. And although you can't see it in the bill, we also talked about relationships with retailers to redemption centers, a spoke and hub style system. One really quick detail that Michael mentioned that could go by unnoticed: UPC codes on bottles, barcodes, because when we were at the redemption center, we learned that a single bottle gets handled 6 times in that center alone in the way while it's being processed. We also went to a newer, more modern center that has automatic sorting equipment. And I would say that is, automation has a huge role to play in moving this forward. The volume could go up threefold, but the ability to sort and be fast about it so that people aren't stuck in lines. We took testimony in Bennington County. They had waits up to an hour and a half. Addison County, we heard up to 2 hours on some weekends. So we realized this is a system that is going to drive away even the most devout recyclers if you can't return in 2 hours or less. So
we will have a system in place by 2025 to deal with this.
in volume with automation for not everywhere, but probably at the larger redemption centers. And we talked to redemption centers that would like to become, they would like to upgrade.
Okay, I'm gonna move on to John Letty from Northwest Vermont Solid Waste Management. And let him talk, and then we've got Kim Crosby from Casella. I'm gonna see how many we can get to. I do want to get to Paul Burns. And then we've got Government Affairs Manager, Tomra Collectible Solutions. I'm not sure what that is, but I'm trying to focus on how we deal with this. I'm not renegotiating the bottle bill, but I'd like to see if there's a way that would make everybody feel more comfortable. It sounds like they are. So Mr. Letty, floor is yours.
Great. Thank you. I want to thank the committee for having me here today. I am John Letty. I'm, as you said, the director of the Northwest Vermont Solid Waste District. We are a union municipal district that's made up of Franklin and Grand Isle counties. I'm also the chair of the Vermont Solid Waste District Managers Association. And it's an association of district, the heads of solid waste districts, alliances, groups. Throughout Vermont, we represent over 90% of the state of Vermont. And yeah, as you said, we have concerns with the changes made to the bill recently. And I'll just outline them here. And I think I do have some suggestions also for compromises or parts of the bill that, it's not in its entirety that we oppose, but more so to the changes that were made in the last few days of last week. Large, as you said, our concerns surround really the expansion of the bottle bill to other materials, which has been discussed from the beginning, but glass was included in that. And then the exclusion of glass wine bottles at the end really is one thing that drew our concern. Waste in Vermont it's a system, it's a utility almost. Every Vermonter creates waste, every business creates waste, and municipalities are responsible for making sure that waste services exist, whether that's through making sure there are private options in their community or providing those services themselves, as many solid waste districts and other management entities do. And those systems have costs. Recycling is mandatory in Vermont. The universal recycling law says all Vermont residents and businesses must recycle certain items like paper, cardboard, glass, plastic, and metal. The cost of that system is a couple of things. It's the cost to process, but the value of those materials are part of that equation. And what the bill currently does is removes valuable material from the larger municipal recycling system and leaves in place glass, which is recyclable, and through multiple means. It can be returned into new bottles, or it can be turned into glass aggregate that's used in construction. There's multiple recycling methods, but it is more of a cost center than a profit maker while it is recyclable.
Okay. So you're keeping glass and you're losing aluminum cans.
Yep. And
Yes,
PET.
aluminum, yes.
Correct. So PET, with like water bottles and sports drinks, those bottles have significant value. And so those being drawn out of the municipal recycling system into a parallel recycling system really shifts cost then to whether you're subscribing to curbside trash service or you're using a drop-off center, costs are going to increase, whether it's because the tip fee rises, so the cost to tip material at recycling facilities. And then transportation is another factor. Heavy glass costs more to transport. And so while a 25% increase in tip fees is significant, you could add to that transportation fees. There's currently, the Lamoille Solid Waste District is currently paying over $300 a ton to transport and process recyclable materials, where they're only paying around $150 for trash services. Now they're unique, and that's an extreme example in Vermont. Our own recycling system is much more even in terms of costs right now when it comes to recycling versus waste services. But those costs are expected to increase, but tip fees could increase 25% if the shift in material is seen. So that's our big concern, and really the fact that solid waste districts, the public entities managing this, this is the first opportunity we've really had to weigh in on these changes. I would suggest that the expansion of the bottle bill to the new materials be sidelined. There is a study for glass wine bottles, which is in the current iteration. And I believe the expansion of all bottle bill materials could be moved into that study so that we can further look at the unintended consequences of changing the waste system in Vermont.
I don't think this committee is going to be rewriting the bottle bill. We're really looking at the impact on the revenues of the state. And I think we all have a vested interest in making sure that the solid waste districts are financially viable. And I understand. So I had been told that markets had changed. Last time we looked at this, I know solid waste opposed expanding the bottle bill because you depended on the plastics. Water bottles seemed to be the big new culprit because that was marketable material, and you use those revenues to offset the cost of less marketable material. I've been told the market had changed, but you're saying you're losing not just aluminum cans, but you are losing, it's water bottles, right? That you're.
Well, there are a variety of plastic. Water bottles are a large, I'd say it's a large material type that would be moved from the current recycling system
That's
into the
where all
deposit
it
system now.
seems to focus is.
Yep. And plastic scrap is at a really high point right now in terms of value. It's, they are a commodity market, so they do shift frequently, just as the costs of or value of steel rises and falls. So does the plastic scrap market. But yeah, so it is still a concern that water bottles, other plastic bottles would be moved out of the system because there's a wide scope of materials in the waste stream in Vermont.
Okay.
And yeah.
Senator Bray, just a question for Mr. Leddy. We'll
Yeah.
have time for discussion later.
Thank you. Exactly. Right with you there. So Mr. Leddy, the two quick questions. One is we in committee, of course, shared the concern about keeping solid waste districts managing, cash flowing, all the rest. So there is a provision in there that says that the PROs will remit money to the solid waste districts and redemption centers. We're expecting sort of something for nothing. Does that provision comfort you some, but maybe not enough. That was our attempt to address the sort of cost shifting you're talking about. And I'm just wondering, to what degree does it seem sufficient or insufficient?
I guess, well, it's sort of an unknown. What's faced in front of us is a severe change in the waste shed that would be coming our way. I'm not sure what those payments would be. I'm not sure if it's sufficient or not. And there's been such a short amount of time to process what that would look like. I really can't say, and I don't. So I would say I'm uncomforted, but willing to explore that more.
Sure. Okay. The other quick question is in Section 8, there's a beverage container implementation study that looks by 2023 at a number of containers, including glass and glass wine bottles. The program doesn't go online fully till 25. So part of the timing here is that as we plan a program, we'll be assessing glass and we'll have an opportunity to make an informed decision about the fate of glass prior to the whole program becoming live. So in fact, it might be that wine bottles would be part of the system by 25. Again, so no one knows the answer to this study, but just by way of making sure people know that we're not ignoring the question, we're trying to address it in the current structure.
Okay. And yeah, I noticed that, and again, with the study, there is no outcome dictated in that study, and so it is really a big if.
Yep.
Okay, so you're stuck with the bird in the hand and the bird in the bush. You know what you've got in the way of plastics and aluminum now. It varies, but you've got enough experience. So that's a no. What this repayment will look like is an unknown. And we're asking you to take this leap of faith that this study and this PRO, is that what will make up the difference for you?
Yep, that's correct. And the costs, it's not as much a concern of the coffers or of the solid waste districts, because waste is a cost that is passed on to all Vermonters. And the universal recycling law does say that especially haulers and other entities can't charge for recycling. And so that the cost for recycling is sort of encompassed in the other waste services. So in the trash services that are provided, when those costs go up, I'm sure trash haulers will increase their rates. Solid waste districts will be enforced to increase their rates. And that really translates to a higher cost for waste management in the state of Vermont.
And I think people being people, if the wait time in sub-zero cold in January is an hour, some folks are going to count up the 10 cents in that trash bag, and that trash bag full of bottles could end up somewhere we don't want it to end up. So we're trying to find that balance. Okay, any questions for Mr. Leddy? Okay, if
Nice to see you, John.
Senator Pearson.
No, I'm just saying hi to John.
Oh, you're just saying.
He lives
hi.
in my neighborhood. Nice.
Oh, if he lives in your neighborhood, are you any relation to former Senator Leddy?
I am not, no.
Oh, okay. I'm going to move on to Kim Crosby. And Kim, you have already popped up.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, hello.
Okay.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on H-175. For the record, my name is Kim Crosby. I'm the Director of Environmental Compliance for Casella Waste Systems. Casella recognizes that the current bottle bill is operating on a system that is broken. There are many systemic issues with the current system that need to be addressed. The issues include fraud, number of required sorts, lack of labor, lack of space for additional materials, and lack of timely pickups of containers from redemption centers and retailers. The blue bin system, commonly known as single stream, is not broken and H175 is proposing to move material from a system that is effective to one that is not. The containers targeted by H175 are already being effectively recycled in current recycling programs and are often sold to the same end markets as the materials collected through the bottle bill system. An expanded bottle bill would remove materials from the recycling stream that have a positive commodity value for Vermont's recycling infrastructure, which has been essential in making the universal recycling law that was unanimously passed by the legislature in 2012 a success. To compensate for the loss, recycling facilities will need to increase the cost of recycling by at least 11%. The increased cost of recycling would be passed on to solid waste haulers, which would in turn be passed on to their customers. That means any increase would be passed on to municipalities, colleges, schools, healthcare facilities, restaurants, businesses, and most concerningly, residents, all of whom are required by law to recycle. In addition to the increase in the cost of recycling, Vermonters will pay more for the products that are targeted by this bill. In addition to the deposit, which consumers get back if they return the container, a 3 to 4.5 cent handling fee would be assessed to each container that the consumer pays and does not get back. H175 leads to increased costs for all Vermonters who are already suffering financially from COVID-19 and inflation. Additionally, the study conducted by DSM on behalf of the Agency of Natural Resources stated that expanding the bottle bill will increase the cost of the current system from $8 million to $12 million and only result in an increase in diversion by 1%. After hearing testimony from several redemption centers and retailers about the problems with the current system, the Senate Natural Resource Committee appointed certain members to a small working group to discuss the issues. However, Casella and other key stakeholders that are responsible for managing Vermont's recycling infrastructure that would be directly impacted by this legislation were not asked to actively participate in the working group. H175 references some form of compensation to the recycling facilities by a proposed producer responsibility organization. However, it is unclear at this time what that compensation would be and if it would be adequate to not have to increase the cost of recycling for Vermonters. Based on the discussion of the work group, which we were allowed to listen in to, there appeared to be consensus on some of the issues. However, it appears that there are still issues that have not been resolved and a consensus could not be reached. Several items that the committee asked the working group to address were not discussed at all. In 2018, Casella invested over $500,000 in equipment to clean up our glass, and we currently send it by rail to a facility in North Carolina where it is made into bottles or fiberglass. There are no bottle-to-bottle facilities in Vermont. Glass has to be trucked or sent by rail several hundred miles away. This is true whether it is MRF glass, glass collected within the bottle bill system, or glass collected separately at a drop-off. There is a glass recycling facility located in Quebec. They have taken glass from recycling facilities in the past and glass collected from Vermont's bottle bill system. However, in an email I received upon request from the agency, as of August 2021, glass from Vermont's bottle bill system was no longer being brought to Quebec and was instead being transported by trucks to a facility in Elmira, New York. The largest cost involved with managing glass is transportation. Glass is heavy, and the heavier a material is, the more it costs to transport. This is why Vermont needs local solutions for managing glass. Casella and other recyclers have been working with the Agency of Transportation on the use of recycled glass in local construction projects. Glass can be broken, crushed, or pulverized and used for various types of construction materials, including replacement for virgin sand, a rapidly diminishing natural resource in Vermont. For the reasons mentioned above, we have been supportive of keeping glass in the recycling system. Supporting local uses for glass would reduce Vermont's carbon footprint and greenhouse gas emissions, resulting in a far more sustainable option for managing this material. The current version of the bill proposes to leave wine bottles in the recycling system. However, the higher commodity materials that this bill is proposing to remove from the recycling system, such as plastic, water bottles, and aluminum cans, help offset the cost of recycling glass. Leaving glass in while removing the material that helps offset the cost of recycling glass out would lead to increasing the cost of recycling even more than the 11% I referenced earlier. In summary, we support being part of a stakeholder group to provide more input on fixing the issues with the current system. But for the reasons stated above, we do not support expansion, even if the issues with the bottle bill system are fixed. We should be turning our focus on material that is not currently recyclable, like boxed wine, and not focusing on beverage containers that are already being managed. And thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Ms. Crosby? Okay, so I think we're hearing the same thing. Glass is expensive. You are presently doing it. We aren't adding to your glass burden, but we are removing some of your money makers.
Yes.
Okay, Senator Bray, timeline. I've got the manufacturer distributors got to set up their organization and have a UPC code and be set to pay the Casella and the solid waste districts. I think there's one other major waste hauler in the state, maybe a couple. By 2024, and the bottle bill expansion will go in 2025. Is there any check back? I've learned to love that word. With the legislature, that if the if we're losing $1 million in the recycling sector, and the manufacturers are saying, and they're getting this from the sheets, right? They're saying we're only getting 500,000 from the sheets. Is there a check back, or is that, how is that going to work?
Sure. There are a number, there are studies within the program, but then there's a regular program audit and a regular fiscal audit. So I think, the intent, and I think the design is to let us observe the system as it builds out and evolves. I mean, there's definitely things to be figured out. I would not pretend, we see crystal clear how the PRO would operate. One of the things the bill does is it encourages the responsible parties, the manufacturers, to come together to create a PRO. And
what if they don't?
There are options for how you would design such a thing. I think, one thing we're going to hear back and forth today, and I think this is fair to all parties, is people will talk about costs and like a handling fee as though that's something new. The handling fee has been part of the bottle bill since day one for 50 years now. Sometimes people call it the second nickel. It's not a nickel, but it's been part of the program from the beginning. I'm sure that anyone who's doing single stream isn't getting that piece of the service for free. It's being the amount of money I think being spent may not change appreciably.
I think you're losing me.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
what happens if the producers say, nope, don't feel like it? We're not going to form, my attorney your attorney. Has his hands up.
There's a provision for that.
Mr. O'Grady.
The people's attorney.
The people's attorney is going to speak.
So in order to form a producer responsibility organization, the manufacturers and distributors need to represent 51% of the beverage containers sold and subject to redemption in the state. If they can't do it, or they don't voluntarily offer to do it, the state can force them to do it, or the state can implement its own plan similar to the e-waste plan that the state administers.
Okay, so there is no, we just don't feel like it option. Something will happen. All right. Okay. committee questions right now for Ms. Crosby. I think I already asked that. We have no other questions. I'm gonna move on. I'm gonna take Paul Burns next unless somebody has a real scheduling issue, mostly because I've got we've got the recyclers, we've got, and I know VPERG, this has been their top priority for years. And then I'm gonna go to Aaron Segrist and Matt Chapman. And I'm not sure who Mike Noel is, if I have time, but I gather they are an industry group that does recycling. So I'll get to him if we have time. This is the last week of the session and this bill is coming out or it's not. So I'm really trying to move my way through. Senator Bray.
You had 12 seconds. TAMRA is the organization that sends trucks out to Redemption Center after Redemption Center and picks up the gathered bottles and brings them back into the other stream.
Okay, so I'm sure he can help us understand that wine bottles don't go to the same place Coke bottles do. And that it would be a different, maybe they don't. Coke probably does own Boone's Farm or something. All right.
I think we've been to high school.
Chair, this is Michael. I don't know if you can hear me from TAMRA.
Yeah,
I can just...
hear you.
Okay, I just want to share that, yeah, I don't necessarily need to testify. I'm mostly here to answer questions. We provide the container pickup services for the deposit system. We process the containers and we provide technology to automate the redemption process. And I can also share how wine bottles in glass containers are handled by 19 other deposit systems in the world. But mostly here to answer questions or and just cover a brief overview of the bill, but it's up to you.
I think we'll only be interested in Maine, but because that's probably the closest thing to us. So, Paul, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Paul Burns. I'm the Executive Director of VPERG, the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. I believe you're all aware of VPERG's long-standing interest in this issue. And I just want to say that in all the years of our working on the bottle bill, this is the first time that we have been able to find substantial common ground with the soft drink industry in terms of modernizing and expanding the scope of the bottle bill. So this really, I know it can be difficult or it can be easy to be lost in the weeds a little bit here, but the idea of expanding substantially the scope of our program that has been in place for nearly 50 years and finding that common ground with the soft drink industry is a big deal from my perspective. So I'm pleased to be here to talk about that and to talk about the revised H175 before you. I have just a few quick points to make. First, it has come up about this question of the markets, the markets for recyclable materials and how those markets have developed and evolved over the last 12 to 24 months. There has been significant improvement in the markets for recyclable materials over that time. You all will recall that prior to the pandemic, China essentially stopped taking most recyclables from the United States, in part because they were quite contaminated, all mixed in together. It wasn't a very valuable commodity. And China said through their national sword policy, we are no longer going to take this. This caused the market to largely drop out of the value for the recyclable materials in the United States. In the meantime, the markets for these recyclable materials domestically have increased substantially. And of course, there's been a lot of use of cardboard over the course of the pandemic as well. And so markets for all sorts of recycled materials have increased dramatically in recent years. According to Resource Recycling publication in February of 2022, they cite data from Casella, for instance, where their revenue, their income from recyclables was $17.6 million in 2021, up from $7.4 million in 2020. That's a 139% increase in 1 year's time for revenues associated with recycling just for Casella. We might also note that this, if you looked at paper, the fiber materials, for instance, we would find that in 2019, the cost per ton of dealing with fiber for CSWD was negative $31 per ton. In the fall of last year in the Northeast, the price that you could get for fiber, paper materials, was $160 per ton. That's again a huge increase in the value of these recycled materials. The point here is that in the past, Madam Chair, members of the committee, you may have heard people say from recycling facilities here that they needed the value of the aluminum cans and the PET bottles in order to cover the cost for the paper or other things that essentially had no value in their single stream recyclable materials. That is no longer the case. That argument just does not hold water because they make money off of all these other materials. It's a commodity. The price can go up and down, but we have provided the committee with citations and information from experts who say the long-term projected value of these recyclable materials is much more stable than it once was. And it is unlikely, the bottom is unlikely to drop out of this as it did a number of years ago when China stopped taking our materials. And so that's first and a very, very important point, which changes the equation around this idea of expanding and modernizing our bottle bill program. Number two is the question of glass, I think. And I will say from our perspective, we believe that glass from glass wine bottles should be included in the bottle bill program. The best value for the glass is when it can be used to create a new glass bottle again. When we think of the chasing arrows symbol on recyclable materials, that's what most people think of. It's a closed loop system, meaning that container or that material will be turned into another container again. And when you turn a glass bottle into a glass bottle again, then you see reduced air and water pollution, reduced use of energy, reduced climate emissions. Those are all benefits that come from turning a bottle into a new bottle. And the bottles from the bottle bill program in Vermont are much cleaner than the glass that comes from a solid waste materials recovery facility. Sending the glass to Elmira is a lot closer than sending it to North Carolina. And the reason why the bottle bill glass can go to the facility in New York is because it is cleaner. It doesn't need to be cleaned up as much as the glass from the single stream system, which is by its nature more contaminated. I mean, think of what happens in your blue bin. The moment it gets dumped into the, it's broken and it becomes contaminated with small bits of paper and plastic. And that, therefore, the value of that glass is much reduced. We signed off on this idea of waiting and doing a study of glass only as a means of compromising to find a solution to move this bill forward. We participated in the working group in good faith, as I think all the participants shared their concerns honestly and looked for common ground. If it would allow this bill to move forward, we were willing to agree to have glass studied in 2 years and hopefully add glass to the system at that point. But substantively, there is no question that glass is better off in the system from an environmental standpoint. I would say too that it is, as noted earlier, better for the solid waste districts if you are removing some of the revenue from aluminum and PET, although most aluminum cans are already in the bottle bill program, I should add. But you would be removing some revenue there. It is, of course, better than to also remove the cost and the trouble associated with all that glass that goes to the solid waste districts. Just remind the committee from 2013 to 2018, CSWD was having such a hard time getting rid of glass that they dumped it illegally. They paid a $400,000 fine in December of 2020 to the Attorney General's office to resolve that case. And it was 18,000 tons of glass that they dumped, the equivalent of 33 million wine bottles over that 5-year period until they were caught by DEC. So there is a big difference in the glass that comes from the bottle bill program versus the glass in the solid waste stream through single stream recycling. I think, Madam Chair, I would say we are willing to support the compromise version of H175 that came before you. We simply agree with the solid waste districts and others who think that it would be better to have glass included in the system if you were willing to do that. The last point I would make is that the working group found substantial agreement. I wouldn't call it unanimous support for this, but substantial agreement around the idea of a trigger for an increase in the deposit from a nickel to a dime if certain benchmarks over time were not met. Those benchmarks would be associated with the redemption rates that we're finding in Vermont. The idea is you want to have the program succeed over the long term, which means you have to keep seeing a high level of redemption, that people are taking their containers back. If you don't have that automatic trigger in the case where there have been 2 consecutive years of failing to meet the benchmark, then we should recognize that there is this kind of unusual incentive right now in the program, if it were to pass as it is written now, where the PRO, the industry group running the program, gets the unclaimed deposits for a period of 5 years. That is, we should recognize, a financial incentive for them to have lower levels of redemption, because the lower the level of redemption, the more profit they will make. I'm not accusing them of intentionally doing that, but I think it benefits from having an actual financial incentive in there for them to achieve these benchmarks. And so that's why we would support a program more like the state of Oregon, where if you fail to meet the benchmark for redemption rates, there is that automatic increase in a dime that has been found to increase redemption rates in other places. So with that, I would say, again, I'm pleased to see a proposal that has lots of compromises and lots of steps forward, including a redemption center that we would see in the city of Montpelier, which happens to be where I live, and other communities that are similarly situated. I think that would be a huge benefit for consumers around the state, and certainly a big win for the environment to expand and modernize the program generally. Thanks so much for the opportunity to testify.
Okay. Questions, Mr. Burns? Questions, Senator?
First, what was the cost of a soda when the bottle bill was instituted, and what was the deposit?
Senator, I don't know what the cost of soda was at that time, but the deposit was a nickel. It has always been a nickel, and our research and others suggest that if it rose with inflation, it would be worth more than 30 cents today, that nickel.
It cost me a quarter, Senator, to buy an orange knee-high for my horse.
For your horse?
My horse liked orange knee-highs.
So it's been a nickel for almost 50 years?
Correct.
Coca-Cola testified that they wish to have the handling fee changed in natural resources. Do you remember what they recommended?
I don't remember the specific amount, but the theory here was that because there would be a reduced number of sorts at the redemption centers or any collection facilities, that the burden would be reduced on redemption centers. It would be easier for them to take materials in, the beverage containers in, and not have to separate by so many different brands. And that would be a cost savings for them and a labor savings for them. And that therefore the industry, the beverage industry, would argue we should be paying them less in a handling fee. Others have noted, including the retailers and grocers, that there have been very few increases in the handling fee over time, even as the state minimum wage has increased, and that creates a pressure point as well. So there is a proposal to look at this issue down the road to determine whether there should be any change in the handling fee. We supported that compromise.
So did they not ask to have the handling fee reduced?
Yes, the industry, the beverage industry, I hate to speak for them, but I believe they would say they would like to see, they would at least like the capacity, the authority to reduce the handling fee.
Thank you.
Okay.
So that's what we're dealing with.
I have no idea what that has to do with anything, but I will take your word for it.
There's an increase, I think, here, right?
Yeah, there's an increase in the handling.
Oh,
yeah. Okay, committee, I've got a few more. I've got Aaron Segrist with the Vermont Grocers Association. I assume that, Aaron, you're going to tell us that it is difficult to handle. And I've got Matt, but I wanted committee, we need to get this bill out today if it's going. And so I'm trying, and we've got four more bills after this.
So I have a question maybe for Senator Bray, and then if anybody else. I'm trying hard to hear the points of agreement, even though some people don't support the bill at all, but sort of would be less opposed. And I think that comes down to if we brought wine bottles back into the deposit scheme. And I'm curious if, I don't know if anyone wants to give a thumbs up, and Senator Bray, is that something that, that's something your committee changed, and I'm wondering if you are hearing it similarly to me, and that might be a strategy worth considering given our time. But
I think I just saw Ms. Seacrest turn several shades of pale.
Now we didn't take wine out. I mean, it's as you know, currently it's
no,
not.
I understand that. You did not include it, but you included everything else.
Right.
But the house, you did in the sense compared to the house, I believe.
Right. Yeah, sure. Now I understand your question. So in part, it was related to the level of sort of controversy over getting wine bottles labeled, distributed, how we're going to deal with out-of-state suppliers, et cetera. So because the whole system doesn't go live till 25, and we were having a working group to look on container types, sizes, et cetera, not just whether wine itself was in or out, we felt like, okay, we will have the opportunity to have a deeper dive into this and make a sensible decision prior to moving the whole system online. So it was not a lack of interest, it was a lack of seeing. I think we just felt like we had more to learn on it, and we felt like we had a mechanism to do that, but the overall construct, a PRO was a positive, positive framework to make progress on the whole issue. So that's it.
Oh, well, I thought I was asking you a yes or no question, and I don't know if you've answered yes or no. So do you agree that it's a compromise to put glass back in as the House did, and it's a worthy compromise? Or are you saying, no, you'd like to keep your construct?
Well, so I can't speak for the committee. I don't really have, as fun as it is to get a yes or no simple answer, it's a complicated system. They're like, when you start pulling on any one piece, it affects the balance between all the others. So we felt like, okay, we're balancing what we can see and feel confident about, and we're leaving to be decided this one major piece, wine bottles, if I just call it that alone. So.
Milk bottles.
How about here's one more bit I could say. In the end, I think wine bottles might well become part of the system, because if everyone has named them as a quote unquote problem, they're heavy, they're large, etc., and there are a lot of them. I think in the end, for the PRO to succeed, it needs to be a comprehensive integrated system. So that's why I would, although I don't know what the studies will say, I think in the end, the studies might well say they should be part of it, and we just don't yet know how to make them part of it. So
I'm feeling better about wine bottles since I realized we are not increasing the burden on the solid waste districts. They're taking the wine bottles and recycling them now. I can see where, especially the small grocers, and I've been through this battle a couple times, I think so. But and we used to have Senator Greenwood here, who ran a small mom and pop store, and he had a liquor license in his establishment. But he was always our first-hand person on what it took to recycle. And I think what I've heard is that there is no real recycling system set up yet. We're talking about automation, but hasn't come yet and probably won't come. And it's a whole different recycling system that would have to be set up, or redemption system, if we went to wine bottles tomorrow. So I'm seeing this as we're saying we're going to look at it and we're going to see what that system would look like. We are going to set up a PRO with the intention that it would make the recycling centers, the solid waste centers, and just, distribute waste haulers whole, or as close to whole as possible. But we're going to move forward with all of this, knowing that everything could change if the studies came in. I think I'm understanding better now what this bill is doing. So Senator Frey, don't tell me I got it all wrong.
No, you got it all right, except I would add one piece, and that is, so we have seen automated centers where you take a giant plastic bag full of mixed recycling, you open a thing that looks like a giant dryer, you pour the whole bag in, you close the door, hit the button, and like 2 minutes later, it's sorted everyone by barcode, and crushed them, and put them in a container in the back. There's a conveyor belt out, and it's sorted them. Plastic is going one place, metal's going another place. There's another chute for you do glass and a machine right next to it. And this, even with the current system, he said, this will pay for itself in 5 years. I would love to expand volume. So we've seen how we just have a very antiquated system right now where it's literally hand sorting everything. I think we're going to move to something more advanced.
Okay, Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just be really quick. I really want this bill to pass, so I don't want to complicate things. But I do want to say one thing about wine bottles, because I almost brought 2 bottles with me today, but I left them on my counter.
For free samples.
Yeah, next time I will do that. But one of them was one of those large sparkling water bottles. That's basically the size of, I think I took a picture of them, basically the size of a wine bottle.
Yeah.
And that one has a 5-cent deposit on it currently under current law. And then the other one was a wine bottle that doesn't have a 5-cent deposit in Vermont, but it does in Maine and Iowa. And they were essentially the same size. And it was, 2 different things and 2 different treatments here in Vermont. But clearly the wine industry and other places have figured out how to do the deposit on wine. So I'm not sure why we can't. But again, I had hoped that wine bottles would be included in this bill. I hear that it may be more complicated, but it shouldn't be that complicated if Iowa and Maine can figure it out. And that we can do the big water bottles. So anyway.
No, I think we will, we are doing the big water bottles. I think the intent is to try and get glass containers, wine bottles. I don't know why you don't take ragu jars, but wine bottles into the recycling process. But given the time that we've had to work on this bill, I think this is the compromise they've come to. And I guess the reason this bill is in here, I think, is because it will impact the revenue, the sheets and the revenues of the state. And so far, it's.
And you've typically approved the increase in handling fee as well.
Yeah, okay. And we need.
And we think there's a fiscal note, any second.
And sent it.
Dan sent it, so let's see if it has come up.
Senator Cummings, this is Faith.
Yes,
I haven't posted the fiscal note because the JFO person is not available until 3:45. If you want me to post it, I'm happy to do that.
yeah, I don't know that we need. Let's post it, then the committee can read it. If we have any questions, we can wait until Dan is ready. But if we don't, maybe.
I'll forward it to the committee right now.
Yeah, let's see if we can get that up.
You want to hear from the grocers?
If we're getting time, I will happily hear from the grocers.
Aaron keeps
And I have Matt Chapman. I'm trying to get a resolution, but. we'll
Senator
see.
Cummings, just so you're aware, you will lose your lawyer for the next testimony by about 3:50 or 4 o'clock.
I will lose my, wait, Michael, you're not
It's not
on.
Michael, it's Rebecca Wasserman.
Yeah, I've got Becky, I've got you coming back at 4:20. Okay. So, and it looks like we are waiting for,
People for 572 are waiting in the waiting room and would be happy to join you, but I know you're trying to finish this bill.
I'm trying to finish this, so Erin, can you, 2 minutes?
Will do my best. There's a lot to unpack in this conversation. I appreciate all of your questions, and I think I will just put a point on it that you have some incredibly valuable questions, and I think that is why we would suggest that we continue the conversation of the work group and include those stakeholders that weren't part of the work group. I apologize. I didn't introduce myself. Erin Segrist, President of Vermont Retail and Grocers Association. Real quick, the Senate Natural Resources, they convened a work group, and they identified 6 key elements that we were supposed to talk about. We talked about 3 of those. One of those points that we did not talk about that I think is pertinent to this conversation is considering where Vermont wants to be with other materials as well in the next 5 years. How is Vermont thinking about the solid waste collection overall? And right now we're talking about expanding a system that does not work and taking product from a system that does work. But now we're talking about where we want to be in 5 years, or we should be talking about where we want to be in 5 years. I think this is a longer conversation. I will agree with Paul Burns that the work group made some great progress, but we have more work to do. Real quick, Vermont Retail and Grocers Association, we represent over 750 members across the state. Of those members, about 500 of them are impacted by management of the bottle bill system. Those members responded to a survey, and 96% of retailers are against expansion of the bottle bill system in its current state. We need to fix the system before we can move forward. 97% of respondents agree that the beverage system in Vermont needs to be fixed systematically. 95% of those members report that the third-party processor has continued to fail in picking up containers on a regular basis. I have members who report to me on a weekly basis that they are being skipped 7 to 10 days, and that is a financial impact to the state as well. Sometimes these pickups are leaving retailers or small redemption centers in the lurch for more than $10,000 and $15,000, which means they have to shut down. They can't employ employees, or they can't provide employees the opportunity to come to work because they don't have the resources, they don't have the space. The system needs to be addressed before we can continue to move forward. I think that is a financial impact. As far as wine, the Senate Natural Resources Committee did report or did attend, they did visit the 3rd largest redemption center in the state and had the conversation about wine bottles. Expansion of the physical building would need to happen. Fewer sorts would need to happen in order for them to be able to bring in glass containers, wine bottles, and nothing in this bill guarantees that we will have fewer sorts to provide extra room for wine bottles to be included in this bill or in expansion. again, there's so much that you guys asked about. In regards to the PRO, I will also report that the work group agreed on one thing and one thing only, and that was all that there was need for more oversight. It's necessary to have more oversight. However, we didn't agree on what that oversight looks like. So as Senator Bray reported, the current system is on the verge of breaking. If it's on the verge of breaking, we should probably take a pause and continue the conversation of the work group to address the issues within the system before we move forward. We have several questions about whether the PRO is the right way to go. And I'm not saying it's not, but we have questions that need to be addressed. How will commingling work within the PRO? Will there be multiple commingling programs within a single PRO, or will there be multiple PROs? How will multiple PROs be overseen? Will retailers and redemption centers have to work with multiple pickups throughout the week now, not just one or two? How is it going to reduce the cost of the system? I think you had a previous witness that said that expansion will increase the cost of the system from 8 million to 12 million, and that was several years ago. So we really don't understand the actual cost of the system now. So there are several questions that are still outstanding. I think, again, we made fantastic progress, but we need to continue to have that conversation with all stakeholders. I know you're in a crunch, so I'm happy to take questions. I did send full testimony to Faith that she will post when she has a moment.
Okay, thank you. Matt, do you have anything that we absolutely need to know? No.
You know, actually, Senator, I was going to say, I don't think that the testimony that I would provide to you is substantially different than what you've already heard from other witnesses.
Okay.
So I am happy to answer questions if folks have them from the agency, but I'm also, knowing the time that crunch that the committee's under, happy to let you move on.
Okay. Committee, we have we have witnesses that are waiting for the next bill, have been for about a half hour. We can't get Dan Dickerson until 3:45. So what I'd like to do is have Dan go over. That's now. Yeah, it is. But Dan is not here. So, and we're losing Michael. I'm gonna go on to the next item. When Dan shows up, we can get that, and then I would really like to vote this bill one way or the other. Senator Bray, really short, you're meeting, so I think you might wanna.
Sure. The two things, so as always, it's good to hear Ms. Segrist's view from the field, and I appreciate the survey data she brought because it indicates a strong need to fix the system we have.
Yes.
And the bill takes a very deep dive into fixing the system we have. It doesn't ignore it in any way. The last quick thing is the question she brought was, where do we want to be in 5 years? And that question came out of natural. Part of having this higher quality waste stream through a deposit system will allow us to build into our own other state programs a post-consumer waste requirement. Because, so we are looking ahead.
I'm gonna have to cut you
We didn't
off.
get
We're
into
not arguing with you.
No, I'm just trying to tell you that there's more to it than meets the eye. And
I think we've gotten that impression. I think this, I said, this is not the first time the bottle bill's been through here, and this is the closest I've ever seen us even start to come to agreement. And there's been a lot of compromise on all sides, and I can only speak for myself, but I'm kind of loath to undo a hard-fought compromise. And as long as it doesn't look like it's going to break the revenues of the state, I think we can talk about moving that. I'm going to move on, and thank you, Michael.
4:20, right?
You're back at well, at the rate we're going, it might be a little later.
Sure. 420, we got one of those bills?
Okay, so we're up back to 572, which is retirement allowance for interim educators. Becky Wasserman is here. Chris Roop, I thought was our transportation analyst, but I guess you've become also our pension analyst.
One day at a time, Madam Chair.
One day, yes, okay. And Tim Duggan from the Vermont Retirement System, Office of the Treasurer. So Becky, why don't you walk us through this? Did this come to us from education?
This came from GovOps.
GovOps, okay, walk us through and tell us what we're looking at in this one.
Sure. So Becky Wasserman, Legislative Counsel. So H572 is a 1-year program with the opportunity to be extended to allow for retired teachers to come back into service. And while they are in service for this 1-year period, they are entitled to keep their retirement allowance during that period of service. And this is different than how it would normally be for somebody who was a retired member of the system and resumed service into the system. So this is making an exception for this time period for these specific positions. So Section 1 of the bill is the authority, which is notwithstanding the current law on resuming service in the teacher system. That says in fiscal year 23, a beneficiary who retired from the teacher system as a Group A or Group C member may resume service to serve as an interim school educator for a 1 school year period and still receive their retirement allowance if certain conditions are met. So first, that is that the beneficiary has received a retirement allowance for 6 months or more prior to resuming service. Second is that the employer of that beneficiary is subject to the assessment for benefits, health benefits on behalf of the beneficiary and makes those payments into the benefits fund. Third, that the employer of the teacher also pays a one-time fee of $2,500 to the treasurer for administrative costs associated with that beneficiary coming back into service. On page 2, subsection B, a person who does resume service doesn't make any contributions into the system during their period of service and is not entitled to a retirement allowance for that new period of service for the time that they come back. So that 1-year period that they resume service, they don't get a separately computed retirement allowance. Subsection C requires that if a superintendent hires somebody under this provision, they have to certify that the district exhausted all reasonable options to employ a qualified active educator prior to employing this retired individual as an interim school educator. And then subsection D allows the treasurer's office in the treasurer's discretion to grant some renewals to this program in fiscal years 24 and 25. So there's the opportunity to have 2 renewals for 1 fiscal year period. The treasurer has to make that determination to renew the authority after June 1st each year, but before June 30th. And a notification would go to the House and Senate Committees on Government Operations of the determination to renew. If there is, in subdivision 2, if the treasurer does make a determination to renew the authority, the beneficiary may only resume service during another 1-year period if they're performing, if they're going into a new position. They can't stay in the same interim school educator position for each year that the program exists. They would have to have a new position each year if it's renewed. And then subsection E is repealing this section on June 30th, 2026. So that would be after the opportunities to renew. And then section 2 of the bill is the effective date, and that would be July 1st of this year.
Becky, is the purpose of this bill to help fill the teacher shortage and encourage teachers to come back into service without losing any benefits? But why just for 1 year? And why have to switch around? It seems like if you're doing really, I guess you could move on with that class. If you're a first grade teacher and be a second grade teacher.
That's right. That's right. You just wouldn't, I think it's that you essentially wouldn't be able to be like a long-term sub for a 3-year period, because it wouldn't really be an interim position if you were just staying in the same position for 3 years if the program is renewed for 3 years. Because that would look more like you were coming out of retirement than just taking advantage of this short-term opportunity.
Okay, so this would allow a teacher rather than a long-term sub who may or may not have teaching credentials to come in and say cover maternity leave for a year?
They could have a long-term sub as well. I think the point here is that it incentivizes somebody who is retired to come back into service because they can keep their retirement allowance. Otherwise, the current law basically says if you come back after retirement to teaching and your salary is above a certain percentage, then you would lose your retirement allowance while you are working in that new position. So, I'll let other people speak to the policy behind it, but I think it's addressing a situation where it's, letting people come back into service while also keeping their retirement allowance. So perhaps drawing more people to come back into service where there are teacher shortages.
Okay, and we have this because it could impact the pension system. Is that basically our jurisdiction here?
Yes, and I'm also guessing because there's a fee in here that the treasurer is, the treasurer's
$500.
$2,500 is paid to the treasurer's office by the school district, who would be employing an interim educator who utilizes this program.
Kind of desperate. Okay. All right. Senator Hardy, you have a question.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Becky. I have a question on page 2, paragraph 1, sort of D1 on renewal. It says the state treasurer should make the determination to renew the authority, which is described under subsection A. Is this the authority writ, and then she has to report to these committees? Is this the authority writ large or the authority for each individual educator?
The authority for the program as a whole.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had to read it a few times and I still couldn't tell, because I was like, does she have to report for every single teacher that has the authority to do this and tell the committees? But no, it's just the full program. She would have to renew the authority to do it for additional years and then report that to the committees that she said it's okay for this to happen for another year. Is that right?
That's the intent. I think if the language needs to be clarified to make it specific to the program as a whole, I can work on that if the committee wants to do that.
It might just be me. I was unclear, but it makes sense now that you explain it. So thank you.
Senator Brock.
Becky, just to make sure that I understand what would happen if this does not come into law, if a school were to hire a retired educator back, they could hire that educator back at the salary that they were making before retirement, but the retirement pay would not be paid while that teacher is working in the new position. Would they continue to accrue benefits toward eventual retirement that could be added to their retirement pay subsequently?
So current law says that if a person who, setting aside this program, a person resumes service and they make a compensation in excess of the amount that's provided in statute that says that they are not allowed to keep their retirement allowance. If they once again retire after they've resumed service, their former retirement allowance shall be restored, and they shall be entitled to a retirement allowance separately computed for the period in which they restored service. So they would have their old retirement allowance restored, and then they would be eligible to get a separately computed retirement allowance for the period that they came back into service. So this is different because it's saying you don't get a separate retirement allowance for the period you come back into service, but you do get to keep your sort of original retirement allowance for the whole time that you're working under this program.
Okay. And then the last question is of the $2,500 fee paid to the state treasurer, do you know whether or not there's any relationship between that fee and the actual cost of the state treasurer?
For that one, we should go to Tim Duggan because he is representing that.
Okay.
Yes, I don't know the breakdown of that cost and how that was arrived at.
Okay, Tim, why don't we go to you? We have one question and then let us know what the rationale is here. Why not just, if I want to come out of retirement for 3 or 4 years and I can add to my retirement benefit in those 3 or 4 years, I just can't collect it while I'm working. What's the benefit and what's the cost to the state treasurer's office? What's the benefit to the teacher?
Thank you. Tim Duggan, Director of Vermont Retirement Systems in the Office of the State Treasurer, and I'm here today. The treasurer couldn't make it, so I'm here on her behalf today. With respect to, I'll take that first piece first about the cost. I don't believe that $2,500 cost is tied to any specific task or function or impact on the fund. I think it is, as I understand it from the folks who proposed it, is to serve as a somewhat of a disincentive for the school districts to automatically go to this solution, and to ensure that this solution is, really truly for the emergency when they can't find another qualified teacher to take the spot. That is my understanding of how that amount came about. With respect to, just to clarify with the status quo, under current statute, if I am a retiree, a retired teacher, and I come back to work full time, I can do so. There's no prohibition on that. My pension will freeze when I'm coming back to work. I will make my contributions and begin accruing toward a new benefit. If I work for 5 years, which is the vesting period, if I work for those 5 years, I'll be entitled to a second benefit that will be added on top of my first one when I subsequently retire. If I say work only 2 or 3 years, I'm not entitled, I have not vested in that second benefit, and I would be entitled to a return of my accumulated contributions plus interest. With respect to my health insurance, when I am a Vistor's retiree, I'm entitled to health insurance paid through Vistor's. If I go back to work full time, that entitlement would stop. However, it would be subject to a COBRA possibility, so I could continue paying full freight if I wanted to do so. What typically would happen though is, as a newly active employee, I would be eligible for insurance through the school system. So that's the status quo with respect to coming back full time.
So I'm just, so the reason we're doing this is we've heard there are emergencies. They're down 3 and 4 teachers and they don't have a first grade teacher and school is opening. And so right now, if a teacher comes back for work, they really have to work for 5 years for it to have any, you know, they'll have some accrued payment, but for it to have any real impact on their pension, they'll have to work for 5 years and get vested again. And they don't get their pension payment in the middle. What this says is we have an emergency. If you come back for 1 year, you know, to get us through this emergency, you can keep your pension payment. But the school has to pay that sounds like the kind of signing bonus fees I hear thrown around. The school has to pay the state a fee ostensibly to keep them, you know, actively looking for new active hires, lower the retirement age hires. So it sounds like this is a very restricted kind of, I've had several emails early in the pandemic in which people said, I'd come back to work if it didn't mean I lost X, X, and X benefit. And it sounds like that's what this is trying to do for teachers. We really need your help. You come back, you won't lose any of your benefits, you won't gain any. Can you still stay on your retired teacher's health care under this system?
Under the proposed bill?
Under the proposed bill.
That is a question that that we have raised a number of times. Perhaps it would make sense if I start back from a little bit earlier. I may not be the best one to answer some of the policy questions behind this. The Treasurer's Office has remained opposed to this bill throughout.
Okay, that's always helpful to know.
Okay, all right. Well, we sent over 3 memos that Treasurer Pierce drafted throughout the course of this memorandum, the most recent from late April, in which she articulated that she remains opposed to this piece of legislation, given the impact of the fund on the funds.
We don't have those memos. That was the other committee, so.
I believe they were sent to this committee today, either today or yesterday.
All right. They are not posted yet. We've got more postings today than health and welfare, so we will get them.
Yeah, so I may not be the best to support the policy behind this bill.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer the technical questions or explain Treasurer Pierce's rationale.
Well, that helps. So.
Yeah, why are they opposed to her?
Yeah, so tell us, why are you opposed to it? Chris has his hand up. Chris, can you?
I was going to let Mr. Duggan respond to that before I jumped in.
Okay, so Mr. Dugan, tell us why the Treasurer's Office is opposed.
The office is opposed given the potential impact on the unfunded liability of the Vistor system. In other states where we've reviewed other states where these types of, post-retirement reemployment programs have been implemented or proposed, and the general consensus is that they have the effect of increasing the system's unfunded liabilities. Now, I think Treasurer Pierce would be the first to say that throughout the course of this bill's development, improvements have been made to minimize that impact on the unfunded liability. However, the concern still remains. The concern also remains that where, and I know Mr. Roop addressed this in his fiscal note, where an incentive structure like this is put into place to bring folks back from retirement, a concern comes with respect to behavioral changes versus the assumptions. You know, the actuaries have certain assumptions about when folks are going to retire. If a teacher sees an avenue where they can retire and then come back and draw both a pension and a full paycheck at the same time, that's not something currently available, but would be financially valuable. And so it could drive retirement earlier than otherwise expected, thereby having an increased cost on the system. And finally, I think there is a concern generally that where you have an incentive like this put into place, the retirement fund might not be the best place to fund it out of, and there should be a look to funding it out of current budgets as opposed to the retirement system. Those are the sort of fundamental concerns that Treasurer Pierce has articulated and done so much more eloquently than I. But I think there's some other technical concerns. For example, how and by whom the healthcare is provided for this period is not a question that I've yet seen answered in the bill. And so I just don't know what the intent is there. So there's some of those clarifications that I think are still outstanding in the bill, but so this office has remained consistently opposed to its passage.
Okay, so you're concerned that behavior and the unfunded health care.
I would also be remiss if I didn't note Treasurer Pierce's reminder that she is very supportive of the teachers and any work to help address the staffing crisis. I think that is not in question. It's this methodology of funding it from the retirement system that is.
You got us on the right track for stopping that unfunded mandate healthcare. I'm going to go to Chris because he's had his hand up, and then I'll go. There's too many Pierces in this room. All right, we'll go to Chris R.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Chris Roop, Joint Fiscal. I'm going to be real brief and just try to sort of tie everything together at the end. As Mr. Duggan noted, and Madam Chair, as you mentioned early on, there are quite a few restrictions in the bill about the parameters by which a retiree can come back and resume interim service without it disrupting their pension benefit. And just to sort of underscore what Mr. Duggan said, the rationale behind that is you don't want this to be viewed as an early retirement incentive, because that will likely lead to higher unfunded liabilities for the pension system. And one way to reduce that risk is to reduce the number of people at any given point who may look at this provision and use it to alter their retirement behavior. So what I mean by that is, let's say I'm 60 years old and I'm thinking about retiring next year. Well, if I had the ability to take advantage of this, maybe I'll retire now and come back to work for a period of time and draw both my pension benefit and a salary at the same time, because it would be in my financial interest to do that. But if I were to make that decision, I would be altering my retirement behavior. I'd be leaving at an earlier age than the actuaries are assuming that I would. And when you look back over the last, since the start of the amortization period in fiscal 2009, retirement behavior and net turnover behavior differing from our assumptions has been one of the largest contributors to the unfunded liability in the teacher pension system. So I think the other committees that looked at this very intentionally tried to narrow the universe of when this provision would apply and to whom it would apply to, because it was intended to be viewed as a sort of near-term measure to help schools deal with a very acute challenge they have with filling positions right now So that's why you see things like the sunset provision and the 1-year limitation and the provisions where you don't get any extra benefit as a result of that period of interim service. That the sort of rationale all comes back to trying to limit the risk of this language altering people's decisions about when they choose to retire. So the fiscal note is very brief and really doesn't say a whole lot more than that. It says, we don't know what the impact will be right now. It will really depend on how many members take advantage of this provision and the extent to which it may or may not alter retirement behaviors moving forward. But that is why you see the narrow sort of prescriptions and limitations that you do see in this bill.
Okay. Senator McDonald.
A curious proposal. For years, superintendents have retired and come back under contracts and collected both. Has that been discontinued?
I'm not aware of that instance happening. I'll look into it.
I know years ago, there were issues with state employees retiring and then coming back as contractors and actually they didn't make any benefits, but they made more in wages than they made. That was many years ago, but I believe we did put an end to that.
Consultants.
Yes, consultants, yeah.
Yeah, one of the
we put an end to that.
Yeah, one of the issues that raises, Madam Chair, is there's something called a bona fide retirement rule, and it requires that when someone leaves, there can't be a pre-arrangement to come back in the manner that you're suggesting, because that would run afoul of an IRS regulation applicable to public pensions. It has to be a legitimate retirement where someone is actually leaving. The point being, they don't want folks to have a sham retirement, leave on Friday, come back in a new job on Monday whilst collecting a pension.
Okay. Committee, any other questions from witnesses? All right, Dan Dickerson has joined us. So we've got the fiscal note from Chris Root, and the bottom line is we don't really know until we see how this plays out and how many teachers actually sign up to come back, if any. And I assume that's why we have the reporting into the treasurer, so we know after year one, if we have 3 people, we're probably all right. If we have 300, we're probably in big trouble. And we can always end it. Senator Pierce.
I do have a question for Becky. I'm a little unclear. So when a teacher, or maybe Chris, if Becky's not there, but when a teacher takes advantage of this option and they're retired and they come back in this limited way, are they and the school at the time contributing to the pension fund, just like for any other teacher?
They would not be making contributions, nor would they be receiving any additional benefit. So the system, and one sort of important thing to note is the contributions an active member makes do not fully pay for the benefit that active member is earning. The employer, in our case, the state, subsidizes the rest of the normal cost that a member's contributions do not pay for. So the system would not be receiving contributions from the member during their period of interim service, but the system also would not be accruing any additional liability as a result of that period of interim service. So you can sort of view it as you're getting a year of service out of a teacher, but the pension system isn't owing anything extra for that year of service that's worked.
Okay.
So the only way that it puts the fund at risk is this early retirement motivation phenomenon that we think we've tried to handle, but we won't really know.
Well, I would say there's always other factors that go into the mix, but the most significant risk factor sort of actuarially is, yeah, you want to make sure that people's hiring and retiring behaviors don't change as a result of this beyond what the actuaries have assumed it would in the big picture.
Okay, Mr. Duggan, you have your hand up.
Yes, I think just to that point, I think with respect to a risk to the system, it also depends what you're comparing against. You know, right now we have 18 teachers who have come back and froze their pension and are working full time. So if someone was just going to do that anyway, like that happens in the normal course, not a lot, but it does happen. So if someone is going to do that for whatever life reason, and then this bill comes into effect, well, then that teacher will be paid, you know, an average of, I think, a $26,000 pension for the year that he or she is working whilst collecting a salary that they wouldn't have been under the status quo. So while they're—
I'm sorry, so maybe I don't understand the status quo. The status quo stops their pension?
Correct.
If they go back.
But did they contribute to the fund today in the status quo?
If they go back to work today, yes, they're making their 5 or 6% salary contributions.
And then they get to take that out as if they were a teacher that started out and worked 3 years and took off.
Yep. Yes.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So this is an incentive to deal with our shortage.
Shortage on a very short term basis. Okay, and nothing says the teacher has to come back at their old salary. They might, schools might hire them at a reduced rate.
Well, and I guess the argument is, if they weren't easy to find, you would hire somebody that would be contributing.
Right.
Open to negotiation.
Or you end up, with a long-term substitute. Do they have to have more than a high school education now? They even used to. Which may not be an ideal situation. Could be a very talented person, but maybe not. Okay. Any other questions for the witnesses? I think we're going to go back to Dan Dickerson and the bottle bill, since we now have Dan. And Dan,
Madam Chair,
yes.
you still need us, or would it be?
No, I think we asked you all the questions we're going to. I'm going to try and put this on for vote as soon as we finish with the bottle bill, but I don't know if we're ready. But we aren't going to. We're not going to have time because we're supposed to start our next bill 5 minutes ago. So this is the end of the session.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Okay, Dan.
Hi, good afternoon, committee.
Good afternoon.
Dan Dickerson, Joint Fiscal. So you all should have the fiscal note. Do I need to share my screen, or should I assume that you all have it?
I'll leave that up to the committee. I've got it on my screen. I think we've got it.
Okay,
Just
great.
tell us what it means.
Okay, so I'm gonna, if you go to,
I got minuses and pluses in roughly the same amount, so.
yeah, so on page 2 of the fiscal note, there is a table that basically shows the deltas or what's changing. So in FY23, FY24, no change to the existing S-cheat revenues that come into the state. In FY25, here's where things begin to change. Starting on January 1st, we now have these new container types that are subject to the 5-cent deposit. And then in addition, starting on January 1st, all S-cheats, so unclaimed deposits, are split evenly between going to the state, which are deposited in the Clean Water Fund, and then being retained by these new producer responsibility organizations. And so those sort of, at least for the Clean Water Fund, there's an up from having the new container types, but then there's a down from sending some revenues or allowing these responsibility organizations to retain revenues. And it's a net down for the Clean Water Fund. It's a relatively small amount in FY25 because the producer responsibility organizations would be reporting and remitting the S sheets to the state quarterly. So the first quarterly payment under this new sort of system would be probably in April of 2025. So there'd really only be one payment in with the new beverage container type mix in fiscal year 25. So it's a net down of 175,000 for the Clean Water Fund. But then over here on the right, this non-state SG, this is basically money that is being retained by the producer responsibility organization. So it's a $550,000 up for them.
So the Clean Water Fund, because we're going to that 50-50 split, loses 175,000. But that non-state sheet revenue impacts, that's the PRO, the producer responsibility. So they're going to have over $500,000 to make whole or pay the solid waste districts and the haulers, right?
Yeah, I don't know specifically how they would use the money, but I think it's just money that they would be able to retain to manage, to do their piece of the collection system.
All right.
And then FY26, and I guess before I go forward, let me just say that this is a projection way out into the future, and I mainly did this to just show the structure of how money would be allocated. I don't really mean this to be, to some extent it is a fiscal, it's a fiscal note, so there's a revenue projection, but it's pretty far out, and so I don't think it's going to be perfect, but just to note that.
So we're bringing in more money.
In FY26, so there's going to be this sort of 5-year period where we split S-cheat revenues with the PROs. And so FY26 is the first full year of this. And so over a full year, the Clean Water Fund is going to be down 700,000 from basically current law. And so, under current law, I project the Clean Water Fund will bring in about 2.9 million per year. Under this new allocation construct, that's reduced by 700,000 to about 2.2 million. And then over a full year, the PROs get to retain 1.6 million. And so that would be annually until FY 2030, when we then do this this new allocation where the state now keeps all the money, but the Clean Water Fund is still only keeping 50%, but then the 50% that I guess was going to the PROs would now go to the Waste Management Assistance Fund. Okay. So this is where the state picks up new money in the amount of 550,000 in this partial year, which is FY30, because it starts January 1st. And then in FY31, which is way far out in the future, it's a plus 1.6 to the state, all of that going to the Waste Management Assistance Fund. So basically everything that was going to the PROs is now going to Waste Management Assistance.
Right, but that's interesting. I wonder where the PROs are supposed to get their money after that. Senator Bray. You're muted, Senator.
I've had to retrain myself to being at home and muting and unmuting. Mr. Dickerson, so can you say a little bit about how you estimated volume? Because we saw, for instance, there's different ways of guessing how much volume flows through. So how many deposits, how much money, there's roughly like 3 times the number of barcodes handled in the proposed system, but I don't know how you estimated number of containers?
I used a report from 2013, so it's old now, but I still, and this is a report that was done by I think a few
RSM?
private entities for ANR.
Yeah.
And I cite it, let's see, find it. Systems analysis of the impact of Act 148 on solid waste management in Vermont. I decided to use the report partly because it also gave a pretty accurate estimate for the amount of soda and beer containers that were being sold. And this was before the state retained S sheets. So I thought, well, if that's pretty accurate, I feel a little more comfortable using their estimates for the non-carbonated, non-alcohol, or non-carbonated, basically the bottled waters and the other things. So I use those numbers to build my estimate. And then I assumed a redemption rate, at least starting off of about 75%, which is a little bit lower than I think the current rate for other beverage types, which is about 77, 78%. But the hope, I think, at least with the bill, is that would increase.
Right. I think actually we're a little concerned. Initially, there'll be a decrease as people have to learn a new system, and then it will come back up. Right.
Right, and that's without, no, that money is not going to clean water. So clean water will be down for 2 years, and then it gets nothing.
It's down for 2 years, but then there's no change. Or it's
no change from the current.
It's down starting in FY26, because starting in FY26, it's only getting half of S sheets.
Okay, and if there are more S sheets, then the clean water will be up from the.
Yeah, if the redemption rate is lower than I estimated, it's quite possible that the Clean Water Fund could at least be it could be revenue neutral, at least in 25. I'm not sure there would be enough to keep it revenue neutral in 26, but it's possible. It's really low.
Senator Pearson has a question, and then I'll get to Senator Gray.
I just want to, I've done a little bit of quick math here, and am I right that halfway through 2032, we've broken even basically by your estimate?
What do you mean by broken even?
Well, I'm looking at the total, I'm just looking at the total net impact on state revenue. If we lose, we have 4 years at 700, we have 1 year at 175, and then it takes us 2.5 years, 1 year at 550 and 1 year at 1650 and a half another year, and then those numbers basically balance out. It's about $3 million. So I want to make sure that I have that right. Part of my question, I guess, is this $700 hit, that's for 26, 27, 28, 29, right?
Yeah, that's each year. For instead of it being 22.9 million per year, it would be 2.2 million per year to the clean water. So yeah, it's 700 down each year.
And that, okay, so I think, this all sort of sugars out by midway through 2032, and then it's all up for, it's hard to predict 10 years out, but.
Yeah, it's a long ways out, but that does sound about right. The state would be a neutral about then, although it's the Clean Water Fund is still down, but then the waste management is up. But yeah, on net, it's.
Yeah, right, okay. Yeah, thanks.
Senator Gray.
Yeah, so this isn't a question, but just a historical observation. When we first did this, sheets, bringing them back into state government, we requested that they go to the solid waste system because we've had this problem around solid waste infrastructure and handling glass and things like that. Whenever that was 5 years ago. But the pressing need at that moment was water. We hadn't yet figured out the sales tax bit and stuff like that. So in terms of losing money from clean water, I've always felt like, why was solid waste money actually being diverted to clean water when there was, well, it was just because that was the most convenient place to get it. So I'm just balancing off the view that this seems like money within the same sphere is being spent in the same sphere.
Committee.
Move this guy.
That's what my question. What is your pleasure with this bill?
I mean, I'm happy to make a motion that we approve as presented. Is that the right motion?
Yep. Okay, so Senator Pearson has moved that we report H-175 favorably as presented. Is there discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those say no. I'm seeing that as 700, and Senator Pearson, would you report that?
Sure, yep.
Everyone for it? Okay,
It'd be the Chris's from finance on the
there we
floor.
go.
Tag team wrestling.
Thank you. Did a lot of work on this one. Does well, we can go back to
Thank you, Dan.
572 at the end of the day to see if anyone is ready to vote out that teacher. But we're going to go on now to 518, which is an act relating to municipal energy resilience initiatives. And okay, I'm not sure. I've got Eric Gilcorn. I think it's that massacred your name. From BGS, and Senator Bray, you have.
Well, I was just going to say, do you want me to do 2 minutes on why we sent this, why Natural moved it? And
this is another one of yours, sure.
You
made us poison that well, Senator.
No, we're just trying to show the love to finance. We're sending you everything. So the short of it is that maybe Mr. Sewell can help me get the facts straight. Maybe 5-6 years ago, we started the State Energy Management Program, the SEMP, and the notion was, the state should lead by example. So when we talk about being smart about energy use, avoiding excess emissions, all these kinds of things, and how cost effective they are, why not ask the state to step up and figure that out for itself? And we did it through this pretty creative partnership by having Efficiency Vermont become like a partner to the state on doing some of this work. And so now I'm rounding off a lot of things, but the state SEMP office has been providing efficiency services, state buildings, and it begged the question, well, there are other government buildings that could benefit from the very same strategies, but they didn't have any kind of funding mechanism. And so this is like the State Energy Management Program, from my point of view, writ large, to take advantage of ARPA money coming through to say we could help municipalities do the very same thing. So it starts with an assessment of energy use, you develop a plan, and then grants help you make it more affordable for the municipality. Go ahead and do the work.
Did this probably when you were down knocking out some more of these bills last week. And we asked to have BGS come in and talk to us, because this is this is managing grants to municipalities, and just wanted to talk to them about their capacity to do this. Any expertise you have in, doing contracting out with the municipalities and all the reporting requirements that go with the federal money. And just wanted to hear from you if you think you have the ability to carry this out. And I have Eric Fieldhorn first, but Eric, I don't know, what works best for you.
Well, Senator, Madam Chair, I was invited by Faith Brown, and I do anything that Faith Brown tells me to do because because I just, it's always been a good way of life for me. But in fact, when it comes to the nuts and bolts of the program, what we have set up in advance, how we have worked with other entities in the past, Brian Sewell is much more qualified to address those details. And so I'd prefer it if I could just be here on the back bench of my office.
That's great. Okay, Mr. Sewell.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Madam Chair, Senator Cummings, Vice Chair McDonald, members of the Senate Finance Committee. For the record, my name is Brian Sewell. I am the State Energy Program Manager under the SEMP program with BGS. Thank you all for having us this afternoon. I believe, Madam Chair, that your question was around the capabilities of BGS to administer this expanded SEMP program to municipalities. Do I have that correct?
That was the heart of it, yes.
So as Senator Bray mentioned, with the existing SEM program, we do partner with Efficiency Vermont, and that partnership would continue for the expanded SEM program to municipalities. BGS has done a tremendous amount of work administering the SEM program for state facilities, and we would continue that work with municipalities in partnership with other key stakeholders in this program, and that includes the regional planning commissions who know the towns day to day. They work with them directly, as does Efficiency Vermont. This would also include the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. So we are prepared to partner with these groups as it's written in the legislation to ensure that we have a successful program in funding energy efficiency and renewable improvements across the municipalities.
Okay. Questions, committee. Senator Pearson.
Hi, Brian. I think this is very exciting, and one of the reasons is I talk to climate-minded people all over the state all the time, and they're always asking, well, what can I do? And, at some level, emailing your legislators is only so exciting for people. And I think this gives folks the opportunity to engage locally and, have our libraries and town halls and whatever, do the work that we need all the buildings in Vermont to do. So I think this is really exciting. I appreciate your support. The SEMP program, just help me understand a little bit. I think of it as sort of the state's internal weatherization fund. And then, you draw money out, do weatherizing on a building, and then pay that money back based on your energy savings. Is that too simple? Or is that only part of what you do? Just help me understand a little more about it, please.
Sure. Thank you, Senator Pearson. And I get excited when I walk by your front porch and see you sitting out there. I'm a neighbor over on Loomis Street, so we see you quite frequently.
Yeah.
Since your neighbor.
Well, people want to be around me. What can I say? Nice to see you. I've been enjoying some solar gain on the front porch lately.
There you go. That is an accurate summary of one part of the SEMP program. So we have two existing revolving loan funds that we utilize for not just weatherization. We do a whole suite of different efficiency and renewable energy investments. So we have funded solar PV projects through the SEMP program. We have, I think weatherization and air sealing are great places to start. No piece of new heat pump equipment or new equipment in general is going to perform as expected if you put it into a leaky building. So when we collect energy bills, we track them in Energy Star Portfolio Manager. We take the energy use intensity ranking for those buildings, kBTU per square foot, target the worst performing buildings, and then we take those buildings and generate an energy audit that is investment grade to ASHRAE level 2 standards. That gives us our recommended energy conservation measures. And again, that can go through the whole suite of air sealing and weatherization, through lighting, advanced controls integration with HVAC equipment, all the way through a new solar hot water heater, wood biomass, you name it. And so our program scope is pretty far reaching, as if there's energy efficiency gains to be had, we will find a way to fund it. And that even includes peak load management. So that's one of the newest examples of energy savings that the program has funded. And that's a pilot program through Waterbury, Bennington, and Brattleboro, where we've already seen some tremendous efficiency gains by using existing building equipment integrated through our controls vendor to the utility peaking alert in order to shift load before the event and then coast through it in order to get paid out on those forward capacity market credits. So we do a lot through the SEMP program, and we're really excited to bring our expertise that we've utilized for state facilities out to municipalities and give them a chance to take advantage of some of these same benefits. Our goal really is to focus on municipalities that have a high energy burden, as listed in the Efficiency Vermont 2019 report. But we also want to look at impacts to climate. How is this program going to help us reach our statewide goals and impact not just energy burden towns, low income towns, BIPOC Vermonters, resiliency. So we'll look at opportunities to put in a battery or solar. That might not always be the case with project funding and what's allowed, but having that report that states, in the future, if you have funding, this is where you can put in a battery, I think is a great way to serve our municipalities.
Terrific. Can you, is the state required to do this, or this is just an opportunity? We had an interesting debate last week, I guess, about in the capital bill about some of these issues. That was more sort of system replacements, but this for municipalities is voluntary, and I want to understand what is the obligation in your program, just as how much exactly of a parallel is it?
Sure. Thank you, Senator Pearson. So we are not obligated to extend this program to municipalities. We want to, and my understanding is under the previous program manager for a number of years now, they have worked on trying to come up with a pilot that would be able to serve municipalities. Our obligation as it stands currently with SEMP is to state facilities, but this represents a great opportunity to extend what we do out to municipalities.
And my last question, I think, is last week when we were having a walk through the bill, it was a little unclear if municipalities and you just said this is mandatory for state projects, but as we're setting it up here, it would be an opportunity for municipalities, but not a requirement. It was a little unclear whether or not towns could use this money to replace a fossil fuel heating system, let's say, with a more efficient fossil fuel heating system. And an assessment is required and is not allowed to sort of promote a new fossil fuel system, but the grant money I don't think is precluded. I'd like to see it be clear that since this is voluntary, that this money not go to new fossil fuel systems, even if they're more efficient. And I'm curious, to your opinion, does that present any problems from your experience?
So thank you, sir. It's hard to say if this would present problems. As the SEMP program has existed for state facilities, we have, in certain cases, funded the replacement of existing fossil fuel heating infrastructure with newer, more efficient fossil fuel heating infrastructure, whether that was a switch to gas from oil. And basically, all of this comes down to the guiding light for our program has been best dollar spend per kBTU per square foot energy reduced. So we look at everything, but we prioritize opportunities to advance biofuels, biomass, whether it's chunk, pellet, or chip. So we prioritize everything else first. But if that was the only way that that project was going to include efficiency gains on the heating system side, we've done that on state facilities. As far as municipalities would be concerned under the expansion of this program, BGS hasn't weighed in definitively one way or the other. We will do this, we won't do this. As the language is currently written, I do believe that it favors renewable heating systems over fossil fuels. If that's the case, we will do that, and we will work to fund as many fuel switching projects as we can. They tend to be expensive, and so that's part of the reason why we advocated for an increased project cap. It's not uncommon to see $400,000 to switch out a facility. Now, that's for some state facilities. It might be less for smaller buildings, but we will work with the guidance in order to get the best dollar spend for GHG reduced.
Thank you.
There's a question from Senator Bray.
Oh, Senator Bray, I'm sorry. I'm trying to let the Senate office know that I'm hopeful we're going to vote several more bills out this afternoon. Just put that this room has been evacuated out there. That's fine.
While we have the two program administrators with us, I just wanted to double check. I mean, I think one of the things that's not obvious in the Finance Committee is that across the hall, there's roughly $35 million waiting to be allocated. And so although we always know these things pay off, getting the seed money for a revolving loan fund is the challenge. So what's exciting to me is that this is not just a one round of grants out one time, but that the savings then end up getting returned and split really with the town and returned to the fund so that we can keep on doing this. So it's a much bigger lift than we might first think when we say, oh, it's a tranche of $35 million going out once. It really establishes a bigger program for the state with a great initial seed capital.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Bray. That's correct. So we do have the ARPA funding, but this language also establishes a municipal energy revolving fund. So in addition to SURF and SMURF, we would now add MRF. And that would allow us to continue to work with municipalities after the ARPA period closes December 31st of 2026. And I think that's a great way to continue the work going forward, because I know there will be some towns that have projects that come up later or maybe not ARPA eligible, and we want to serve them as well. The fiscal note, I think, mentions the use of the state energy revolving fund, and I did just want to clarify that the way that was meant or intended was through the establishment of the new municipal energy revolving fund, and not granting municipalities access to the existing SURF fund that is, I believe, restricted to state facilities.
Okay. Committee, any other questions? Okay.
So the last time we looked at this bill, I don't think there was a fiscal note, or we didn't have it.
I don't think, no, this is a revolving loan fund, so it's ARPA money in, ARPA money out.
No, it's not. ARPA money you can't use as loans. So there's the fiscal note. It's a different funding source. I'm just looking at the fiscal note.
It's switched.
It's IIJA.
Yeah.
There was
a question we had last time.
Thanks, Senator Hardy. There was a switch in funding sort of on the home stretch as APROPS and JFO looked at it.
Yeah, I remember that from last year when we talked about ARPA as a revolving loan for the broadband. We couldn't use it.
Couldn't use it.
Yeah. So this
has to be spent.
It has to be spent by 2026 or something like that. Yeah. Okay. This is helpful, and you should get merch with SURF and MRF and what the other one is. I just see like little cartoon characters, and you could have dolls. You could have, it'd be kind of fun.
Okay.
T-shirts, bobbleheads.
Made from sustainable materials.
Because we're going to lose Michael O'Grady, and
he's
he's next, and I'm trying. So, is there any questions from these witnesses Senator Bray, I'm gonna lose your next bill if you.
No, all I was gonna do is ask the chair if she was ready for a motion, in which case it would be to vote out
I'm gonna
favorably.
try, I wanna get on to Michael and then we'll vote. I think we've got 3 that might be ready to go and I don't know about this 4th one. Okay? So Michael, why don't you come up and we will go to 466. And then we've got the fiscal note on 716. I think we're ready to vote that one out. Thank you, everyone. BGS, I think we'll probably get you your money. Get those projects going. Welcome back.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Okay, an act relating to surface water withdrawals and interbasin transfers. Why does that sound controversial?
Well, first, I wasn't sure why this bill is here. So I went and talked to the secretary and I can explain that, but it has no current revenue impact at all. What the bill does is currently withdrawals of surface water for whatever use is not specifically regulated by the Agency of Natural Resources. Instead, unless it's a snowmaking withdrawal, I should say. Instead, they have a procedure which sets the limits that are intended to protect the quality of the water under the Vermont water quality standards. This issue came to a head a couple of years ago when there was a proposal to remove water from one surface water and basically pipe it into the watershed of another surface water for use for snowmaking. And it was then gathered attention and it was learned that there isn't a regulatory program for surface water withdrawals. There was a study group that was formed. That study group recommended legislation, and this is the legislation that is in front of you. What it does is it does 3 things. First, it requires persons that are withdrawing 10,000 gallons or more in a 24-hour period or 150,000 gallons or more in a 30-day period to register with the Agency of Natural Resources unless they are withdrawing for farming. If they are withdrawing for farming, then they report to the Agency of Agriculture. If you are not farming and you've registered, you then have to start reporting annually until the Agency of Natural Resources adopts by rule a permitting program, and at which point the persons that are subject to that rule will need to get a permit. Currently, you do not know who is going to need a permit or at what volume or threshold you would need a permit. When I talked to the Senate Secretary, he said, that's why he sent it here, because of the impending permit and the fact that at some future point, there may need to be a fee for that permit. But there is no permit now.
Okay, so at some future point, we may need a permit which would add to the revenues of the state. But right now, nobody needs.
You don't even know who would need one or if one would need it.
Okay.
Isn't there a general permit though?
Yes, but that is still underneath the rule as well.
That's the secretary. So I'm reporting this for ag, but so I only focus on
Guess
little
who's gonna
pieces.
get reported for
I'll be
finance?
glad to out there. But the secretary said, you know, there's gonna be a permit, and so that usually has a fee. And I said, well, this is down the road, and I thought it was a general permit. In other words, assumption numbers.
The secretary's getting very persnickety. That's why
I
the
would like that
insurance
about it.
bill went to approach because it said something about revenues would cover costs. It was the whistleblower awards. But it took us a while to figure out what revenue impact was in that bill. So, okay, so right now, there is no fiscal impact. There might be a positive impact in the future. All right, committee, are you ready?
Did
An motion?
agriculture amend this bill?
Yes,
They proposed to.
that was presented in your other committee, I believe. the other day.
Natural
I'm
resources.
happy to go over that if you want, Madam Chair, but Senator Bray.
Okay, but in our domain, up Senator Bray.
Yep. So I'll put it on the table. Maybe you're not quite ready yet. I would move that we report out favorably H466.
Okay, Senator Bray has moved that we report out favorably H466. And that's as presented to this committee, so that's with the agriculture.
With both reports, basically.
Yeah. Okay. With the
With
agriculture.
both reports, yes, thank you.
Okay.
Are the, just one report supersede the other? Is it a circle?
We complement the other.
So the way that the Senate secretaries proposed it, so that both committees have the opportunity to report. Senate Natural will go first with its report. And then the Senate Agriculture Committee would go with its report. The Senate Agriculture Committee's report is a strike all. And so if that is amended, that would be what would be approved by the body.
So what have we got in here? Is that the strike all?
What you have right in front of you is both, I believe it says both.
But the strike all takes Ag's ideas and puts it right on top of.
Okay.
So Senator Bray has moved that it will be amended as recommended by the committee.
Be approved as it arrived here.
As it was
As
presented.
presented, we're not amending.
We're not amending.
So are we looking at draft 4.3 of H466?
That is the House Act, that is the Senate Agriculture Committee proposal, yes.
Yes, my motion was to report out.
Yes, so that's the bill that's presently in play. It's a strike all. And that's what we're doing. Let me finish with Senator Brock and I'll get to Senator Hart.
Just a question in terms of voting on it, if there is no fee, which is the focus of this committee, why are we voting on it? Why are we voting?
We have to vote it out.
Oh, we can move it out without recommendation. I mean, why would, there's no recommendation to make because there's nothing that's relevant to our area of focus, is there?
No,
But that wasn't the motion. The motion was to,
approve.
Amended as recommended by the committee on agriculture.
you're right.
As presented.
I have no substantive subject matter knowledge of this. Our knowledge of this committee is based on fees. There is no fee, and so therefore I would not consider voting this out favorably. I would consider voting it out without recommendation.
Senator Bray, would you be willing to change your motion?
Sure. The only, it doesn't make much difference. I do always think it's more reassuring to the room at large when they hear that something's voted out favorably as opposed to without recommendation. It's as though there's some sort of hands-off quality to the thing. There is a potential permit is why we got it. So, but be that as it may, I'm not going to be a stickler. How would you like the motion amended? Do you also want it to refer
I
just?
think you just withdraw your first motion, and unless somebody objects, then you can make a second.
All right. So I'd like to withdraw the first motion, and I would like to vote the bill out without recommendation. But now I want to disentangle. We actually have two amendments that have been laid on it. I don't know if we need to select or that we're just voting it out.
I think what we're saying is that there is no impact on state revenue at present, and it's 5 o'clock at night and we don't have time to delve into the intricacies of water withdrawal. We're leaving that to the committees of jurisdiction.
Right. I mean, so I don't know, because we have these double reports, neither of them has, leads to a permit fee for sure. So I don't know that it makes a difference, but so to vote the bill out without recommendation is amended by the committees on agriculture and natural resources.
Okay. So Senator Bray has moved that we vote H466 out without recommendation since there is no impact at the present time on the state of Vermont. There is no fee in this. That,
Can I just ask my quick question?
Yeah.
And if this is, I just wanted to know if Michael has a 2-minute explanation of the difference between the ag version and you explained the natural resources version to me, and I'm wondering what ag did that's different. Or you can talk to me in the hall. But
So what ag did is left the Senate Natural Resources proposal intact, except for its application to withdrawals for irrigation, for farming, livestock watering, or other farming purpose. Any of those withdrawals will be reported, 10,000 gallons or more in a 24-hour period, 150,000 gallons or more in a 30-day period. Will be reported to the Agency of Agriculture annually.
okay.
And then the Agency of Agriculture will compile that data, report it to ANR, and ANR would report it to the General Assembly.
Okay. And nothing, that it's all just reporting, everybody reporting to each other about that?
Reporting, the House, the Senate Ag proposal also includes an exception from the future permitting for irrigation, for withdrawal for irrigation, for livestock watering or other farming purpose. So that would not be permitted underneath the ANR rule. So
In the future, it's like a future exemption.
in the future, right? So whatever that rule comes up with as a permitting program, it would be an exception.
Unless they change that.
Unless you change it.
Yeah, okay.
And
Thank
then we'll have the data to make that call.
yeah.
Does
Thank
Michael, thank you. Mr. O'Grady, does the ag version also not require registration, just reporting?
There was discussion in the Senate Ag Committee about what the action was going to be called. They did not like the term registration, so they are just reporting. They thought reporting and registration were duplicative. So it is just reporting.
Thank you.
And we kept the same amounts that Senate Natural had, you know, there's, if you're taking under 10,000 gallons a day, you are sort of, everybody withdrawing is, you can't be messing with the river. It has to be de minimis is this current standard today. And today, if you were a farm or anybody taking 5,000 gallons, you don't fall under any of the schemes. So we just took the same amount, you know, a little bit of a different treatment, and had a reporting to the Agency of Ag under the theory that will have better compliance from farmers. You know well the old dance there, but then we pushed the data back to ANR to make sure that ANR was collecting the whole universe. There's been some testimony from prior surveys under the EPA that ag is actually taking a relatively small amount of the withdrawal in the state. So anyway, this was something that
But it is required, they have to report.
is required,
So,
yes.
okay.
Yep.
All right, thank you, that's helpful.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
the Senate Natural Resources proposed 4 amendments to the bill. Sent them to agriculture with the amendments intact. Agriculture moved to accept the natural resources amendments. Let's strike 1 through 4. We're only substitute a strike all as presented.
Right. And
So-
we're working for the strike.
So could I just say that this,
Which means we will either gonna do with that recommendation or approve what the agriculture committee has done. I think those are our only options, and I'm not advocating for or against this procedural as they were.
Okay.
So just, which is what would be, as a, can help me as the clerk
Michael?
to,
so I think you would recommend, I think you would vote that the committee votes out H 466 as the proposed for amendment by Senate Natural Resources, and then that report being further proposed or further amendment without recommendation.
Well, the further amendment is a strike all of.
Sure, but
It
then
just permit.
so we weren't trying to be sneaky. It became
Oh, no.
extremely confusing. And so we said, Michael, can you make this a strike also so that people can read this? And our amendment was, as been described, fairly discreet, but it involved a few sections of the bill. And so it wasn't, you know, a discrete amendment couldn't be presented in discrete language. And so we just went for a strike off so that we would not confuse people, which we clearly succeeded well in doing.
We voting the bill out without recommendation.
That's what the motion
After
is.
it's been amended as recommended by committee on
We are
ethics.
voting it out without recommendation
So it's
because
proposed, right? So the report of the Natural Resources Committee as further proposed for amendment by the Agriculture Committee, you are voting out without recommendation.
Because our recommendation was simply add to the confusion.
Okay, and I think that's the motion that Senator Gray has made.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay,
More eloquently stated by council.
let's hope council can help the clerk get it down, and
Senator Gray moved to report the bill without recommendation.
that's it. Thank you.
Sometimes the simplest
I
things
thought
are
that's
the
what
most
we
difficult to
said a
comprehend.
half an hour ago. All right. Further discussion on this one? No, okay, good. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. That's 601. And Senator Pearson, you will report that.
Yeah, should I run that upstairs?
Yeah, well, we may have 3 or 4 more. Let me.
Okay.
Okay,
I'll be
so
ready
we
to
have done
speak.
175, the bottle bill. 572, retirement allowance for interim educators.
Yeah,
Anybody ready to do that one?
yes.
Yeah.
Motion,
I would move H 572 favorably.
okay, as presented.
As presented.
Further
Are we
discussion.
done with Mr. O'Grady?
I'm waiting for 709.
Yeah, wait, 709. That's at the top, we'll do that next, okay. So. Motion is we vote 572 out favorably. Discussion, if not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed, say no. And Senator Brock, would you
Senator Brink.
report that one?
Okay.
I can't keep track, I'm not sure which one.
That was
That was
572.
572.
Teachers.
Interim
retired.
teachers.
Okay. Let's go up, so we will release Mr. O'Grady. Miscellaneous agriculture subjects. I don't think we're ready to do that one, right? That's the airport.
I'm ready to vote no on it.
I'm ready to do that one.
And we have some witnesses. We have some witnesses who would like to testify on that, by the way.
Okay, yeah, well, I think we said we would get the agency of ag and
Trina Broussard
find
from
somebody
the
from up there. We need to find a.
is the primary person.
And I think also the question of how many of these airports are on prime ag soil. Because if it's only this one, or maybe one in Addison, we've got something.
To the best of my knowledge, there was nothing pending about any other airport, nor was it our intent to do.
It's a
with any other
slippery
airport.
slope. Once you do it for one, I guarantee you, Randy, they'll be back for the rest of
Okay,
them.
we're not gonna argue that now.
Yeah.
We're not ready to do that one. 518. Yes. I'm bringing my gavel.
572 was moved by.
572.
Me, that.
Yes.
Everybody's trying to.
It's the vote was 601 and the recorder is Brock. All right, That gets us on to 518, that's the municipal energy resilience programs. Anybody?
So we don't
Up
have
Senator McDonald.
council, but yeah, all right. You don't want to think about prohibiting fossil fuel heating systems, Senator McDonald?
Senator Gray.
I believe that that's what the bill does.
Except that it
But
doesn't.
explain your,
explicitly say that.
if you would explain
Well,
your.
Senator Bray has a question.
Okay, if we're gonna talk amendments, I'm gonna go on, because we've got 716.
Well, I
Wait, is that?
maybe somebody's phone.
I thought on 518, I already proposed we move it. But
No, we haven't been there. Before you do, why don't I, Madam Chair, just to be straightforward so that we can either take the time or not.
Okay.
When we had Becky in last week, I asked, because people from the House have said to me, hey, you guys gotta just clean up this language. It's a little unclear. And it was the same issue that we were debating on the floor of whether or not you could use capital money in that case to replace a fossil fuel furnace. It's clunky and it's not actually prohibited. This voluntary program of towns could potentially get a grant to take an oil furnace at 70% efficiency and buy a natural gas furnace at 85% efficiency. I'm just making those numbers up. Because it's voluntary, no town is required to do this. I think we should clean it up and prohibit that. And a lot of towns wouldn't go there. I mean, no town gets a grant today from the state to replace their infrastructure like that.
Okay.
They could, even if they were wanting to do that, they could use a grant for weatherization for other things. But when it comes to these heating systems, I'm worried about these sort of 20, 25-year investments. So that's where I'm coming from. People have presented the language. I could get it worked quickly, but it's also not worth it to slow down if I'm going to get 2 votes for this or whatever. So
I think Senator Pierce has the right instinct to make it clear
Yeah.
that that's not the intention. And I don't want to take the
Yeah,
time for him to do that.
yeah.
I would caution us not to make it so tight that if you're putting in a system that's 85% renewable, hallelujah, and you've got a 15% fossil fuel backup for the 22 days of the year when you need one, that we don't stumble to go down that alleyway. And I trust Senator Pearson would also come up with an amendment that does that.
So
see what I can do.
yeah, see if you can do that. Okay, I've got Julia Richter here now.
Okay, Senator Bray does have his hand out.
Senator Gray.
So Senator Pearson and I have talked about this, and I'm going to say it this way: the Committee of Jurisdiction spent time on this feature, and we built the bill we sent you includes an assessment that precludes leaning on fossil fuel as your primary heat source. But we also learned, as Mr. Sewell said while visiting with us, there are instances in which you can't deliver an entirely renewable energy solution for that particular spot. Every building is unique. And sometimes, as Senator McDonald was just saying, there may be the 20 coldest nights of the year where you also need to have a fossil fuel system kick in to keep the place warm. So given the performance of the SEMP, we said, they're already running it well. They're preferring renewables over fossil fuel solutions. They're getting great results. Why do we want to put our thumb on the scale? The other thing is, I would just say, we're just voted a clean heat standard that talks about evaluating everything by fuel type and then making rational choices based on that. So even a quote unquote fossil fuel burning unit might actually switch over to biofuels and no longer be burning fossil fuels. So, and these are 20, 25, 30-year investments. I would just like us to recommend to us that we stay technology neutral with this predisposition to renewables, but not tie the hands of the people running the program. So that's why it came to you this way.
So
Okay, wait.
why would we give towns a grant? I mean, a town needs to replace its furnace today. They don't come to the state. They don't have any option to come to the state. This strikes me as quite different. And I'm really struggling to understand why we wouldn't hold it to a higher standard.
Right. Well, I'm saying, I guess what I'm saying is based on the performance, I have confidence in these people to run the program based on what they've been doing in the last half dozen years. And I'm feeling like at this moment, we're in danger of saying we know better without any real world experience running the program. And we're gonna take.
Okay, I'm
we're
gonna have
do
to
the
cut
program
this off because the Senate Secretary is here. I've got one more vote and I've got Julia Richter. You two can talk offline. I'm with you. It's a grant.
Okay. I'll at least get the language. We can have this
talk about
discussion
it.
again one more
But
time.
Julia, we put off, and I've gotten anxious emails from the chair of education about where is this miscellaneous bill? And Julia, you're here. And we have your impact. And basically, we're looking at the $6 million that's in the yield bill. Is that, it's been sitting there for a while?
Yeah, so good evening, Julia Richter with the Joint Fiscal Office. There's really three parts of H716, the miscellaneous ed bill, that may have a fiscal impact. So does the committee have my fiscal note in front of them?
Yeah.
Okay, so I will start with the three sections that really we consider to be relevant. So the first is as you were referencing, Madam Chair, is the 6 million shift within the education fund. So we estimate that in fiscal year 23, it would shift approximately 6 million within the ed fund. So from the education payment to the special education aid. And this is really just a construct of how the years that are used for calculating the supervisory union's census grants. So this is a change to say that supervisory unions will receive a census grant from the calculated from the years of 18 through 20 or 19 through 21, whichever is higher. So I will pause there on section 1 to see if there's any questions.
Any questions at this point? I'm losing my committee, so just keep going.
Okay.
I'm at the quorum.
All right, so section 3. So in current law, the collector and treasurer must give a bond to the district conditioned for faithful performance of their duties before entering upon their duties. And this section amends this current law so that a school district could provide suitable crime insurance in lieu of taking a bond. We estimate that while this may slightly affect some school budgets, ultimately it's estimated to have a de minimis impact on the education fund and corresponding tax rates.
Okay.
There any questions for section?
I missed that talking. So that you think would be a slight decrease to the cost, or is it neutral?
So for section 3, we estimate that it's de minimis, that there won't really be a change that we will see.
So
it may have a slight it may slightly affect some school budgets, but we don't anticipate it to be a whole lot.
Mark, do you have 466?
No.
Yes, right there, right there.
Okay. All right. So let's get to section 4.
Okay, so section 4 appropriates $712,500 from the ed fund to AOE in fiscal year 23 for the funding of the peer review support grant program. This appropriation has not been included so far in our modeling of the yield bill, but if the committee would be interested, we could include this in the modeling if that would be helpful.
Peer review support grant now. This one I don't even know. So this appropriates $712,500. Is this in the budget at all? Has this gone anywhere other than here?
This is ed fund, and this would be included in our yield bill. if we
Yeah.
were to
It's that
approve
little
this.
bonus or whatever, or the peer thing, is that?
Yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
peer support
And
peer support grant.
was this, if I may?
Yeah.
Julia, do you know if this was ever in or proposed to be general fund revenue or in the budget, or has it always been just has it always been thought of as ed fund?
I'm not sure. My only experience with this appropriation, with this grant program, has been with looking at it in the Senate recommendation, the Senate Committee on Education recommendation. So this wasn't included in the original bill as it passed out of the House.
Okay, so right, this obviously came from the House. Sorry, thank you.
No, that's fine. So both section 3 and section 4 have been included in this fiscal note, which were not in the fiscal note as it came over from the House. So I believe that there was some misunderstanding last week about if the fiscal note needed to be updated or not. And it's been since updated to include section 3 and section 4.
Okay, and this is part of the teacher recruitment, right, program. It would have a peer that would help you with mentoring and encourage you to work your way through, I assume, student teaching kind of things.
Yeah, it's to provide grants to, it says to expand support, mentoring, and professional development to prospective educators seeking licensure.
Okay. Committee, we've been waiting just on this.
So we would just have to make sure this is in the yield bill.
In the yield bill.
And the House passed it, but didn't put it in their yield?
No, the House did not pass it.
Oh, I'm
This,
sorry.
this was not included, this section for this appropriation was not included in H716 as passed out of the House. So it wasn't used for the yield modeling for the House yield bill. I will say, if it's of help to the committee, depending on what you decide to go through with the construct, the yield construct that I testified to on Friday that you had requested had originally left around 1 million on the bottom line.
And I think all of those things are about to change, just so, yeah, I mean, this is chump change, and if the other side doesn't like it, we're gonna be in committee of conference, I think. What are you looking for, Senator? We are doing H716 miscellaneous ed. Miscellaneous changes in education law. Okay, committee, discussion. Motion.
The educator development, workforce development thing, we never got any testimony out of it except for from the Senate Ed, right? I just don't know what I think of it. But
The only question I have is 716
yes, yes, that is the bill number. Is that the only question you have?
is I don't think there's any interplay, but there's also that $15 million thing that's hanging out on the yield
Yeah,
fund.
that's,
And
I don't think there's any interplay. That's money that I know is near and dear to the heart of the chair of Ways and Means. That is going into a revolving loan fund,
Yeah.
kind of like we're doing, and it's meant to help tech students either build or rehab.
Yeah, no, I guess between that 15 million, which is a bit of a mystery, this now $750,000, the bazillions of millions that we've put into workforce development elsewhere in ARPA dollars and grant, that's, I mean, I think this is a good thing. And I guess my question is, when we say yes right now, are we committing to put it in the ed fund, from the ed fund, or?
Yeah, or we could just say, no, I've got the request for MEAP, who got turned down by appropriations.
What's MEAP?
No,
Well,
it's MEAP. MEAP was in Montpelier, Vermont Educational Enrichment Program. They help teachers develop climate change programs. I've been told by folks that we don't fund individual programs. And
I think that was on that didn't make the cut in Senate Education either.
no, so they're here and I've got to tell my constituent who heads it that I can't get $500,000.
Yeah, my constituent, it's mine and your constituent too, because I've heard from them too.
Yes.
But I did hear, I mean, I don't know if we've officially heard this, but the vice chair of the Senate Economic Development Committee said that 15 million could easily go down to 10 million for the.
Well, yeah, and we could use some of it.
Even that seems a
for
lot.
teacher, but schools also got a lot this past year. They got federal money.
Right.
That. So obviously they made choices as to what to do with that federal money. So it sounds like we aren't ready to vote this one out either.
well, I could support it now if you want. I mean, I think it's a teacher workforce thing.
It is.
And it's actually, and there's some other things in here that look like pretty technical, like around special ed.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure we would want to do. So I'm happy to support it and work on the yield bill or do it tomorrow.
We can do it,
That's
no,
easier for you.
yield bill, it sounds like universal meals may be in trouble and that gives us a lot of money, but.
So if we vote this bill out though, the 6 million is just a shift, so it's not a cost, it's a shift.
It's been sitting on that line since
Yeah.
we went to the block grant, and they just haven't.
Right, so
Got
the
it.
712, if we vote this bill out today as it is, then we're committing to putting that 712, that we just have to make sure we remember and that we want to.
Well, I think Julia will remember for us.
What are others think? I mean.
I don't know.
I would like to know more about where this came from. I know that Senator Campion is into it.
Okay, well, why don't we put this off? And we need to go upstairs and tell the Senate President or the Secretary that we did vote it out, right? Did you leave thinking we were?
I don't know what.
Senator Cummings, I can let them know.
Can you let them know that we
Sure.
did not do?
Yes, we are not voting anything else out tonight.
716, we're not voting that out today. Okay, then I think that's the end at this point. Senator Gray. What you
forest land for enrollment in youth code program.
that we haven't taken that up yet.
I have it here, I just didn't.
Yes, no, I make sure Faith has that. Okay, so Senator Bray.
Yeah, thank you. If we're gonna consider amending 518, which I have to tell you is irksome, we have an energy committee that spent time on the bill. This is not about a utility. This is about another program outside of a utility. And so then I would say we should get BGS back in here, who's been running the thing, and we should hear from VLCT, and I can give you a couple other witnesses because we went through this discussion and we voted it down in our committee. So
Okay.
You voted that specific idea down? Because
yes,
that's a different, that's not what Senator McCormick told me, but.
Well, your actual mileage may vary. I don't know what he.
Okay, why don't you two discuss this
Yeah, and Sarah
offline?
Ray, just
Are
so
you
you know,
ready to go?
I was trying to talk to you yesterday
Yeah,
about
let's go off live
Thank
and
you.